today's agenda, which is a rare occasion for the MARTA Oversight Committee. But if you want to speak, you do need to sign up on the list that's right down there. So anybody who has not signed up to speak that would like to sign up to speak, please do so now, and we'll begin in a couple minutes. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the first meeting of the MARTA Oversight Committee for the 2013 and 2014 term of the General Assembly. We do have some new members on the committee. For those of you who are not familiar with MARTOC, it is a joint committee of the House and Senate that is charged with overseeing the budget and fiscal affairs and governance of MARTA. It includes appointments of House members and senators made by the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House. The chair is appointed by the Speaker of the House, and for this upcoming term, that will be yours truly again. The vice chair is appointed by the lieutenant governor, and that will be Senator Fran Miller this term. There are certain ex officio members, the chair of Senate SLOGO, glad to see you here, Senator Ligon, and then the chair of House State Planning and Community Affairs, Representative Pruitt. We're actually going to let everyone make some introductions, and the chair of Ways and Means are also ex officio members of the MARTA Oversight Committee. It's created by joint resolution of the House and Senate that was passed back in 1999. All right, well, why don't we start by recognizing each member to introduce themselves, name, the chamber you serve in, and where you hail from. Senator Ligon, what's your number down there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 29.
I got you on. All right.
My name is William Ligon. I serve in the Senate, and I represent the 3rd District, which is down on the coast. I live on St. Simon's Island. My district includes 5 counties: Glenn, Camden, Brantley, Charlton, and McIntosh counties.
Senator Miller.
My name's Fran Miller. I serve Senate District 40, which is north DeKalb, Peachtree Corners in Gwinnett County, and 3 precincts in Fulton County in North Fulton.
Senator Hill.
Good morning. I'm Hunter Hill, and I'm in the Senate and represent Senate District 6, which is Smyrna, Vinings, Buckhead, and Sandy Springs.
Senator Butler.
Good morning. I'm Gloria Butler, Senator for the 5th District, representing parts of DeKalb County and Gwinnett. Served in the legislature. This is my 15th year. I was appointed to MARTOC by the governor.
Chairman Pruitt.
Representative Jimmy Pruitt from Dodge County, Eastman, Georgia. I serve 5 counties: Dodge, Telfair, Wheeler, Jeff Davis, and part of Lawrence County, and proud to be a member of this. Looking forward to being a part of it and getting involved. Thank you.
Representative Geisinger.
I'm Harry Geisinger. I represent Roswell, Georgia, and I was a member of the State Planning and Community Affairs Committee back in the days when it created this committee.
Representative Taylor.
Tom Taylor. I represent District 79, which is the city of Dunwoody, parts of Doraville and Chamblee. I have 3 MARTA stations in my district. I ride MARTA all the time. Also the Public Safety Subcommittee Chair on this committee, and am also appointed to the MARTA Ethics Board.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lynn Riley. I represent House District 50, the city of Johns Creek. This is my 2nd term on MARTOC, and look forward to serving again with Chairman Jacobs.
Thank you. I am Mike Jacobs. I represent the 80th House District in the General Assembly. My district is 3/4 the new city of Brookhaven and 1/4 the city of Sandy Springs. I have 4 non-contiguous MARTA stations in my district. I've got the Brookhaven station, Medical Center, Sandy Springs. Well, I skipped Dunwoody. That's in Representative Taylor's district, and North Springs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Butch Miller. I serve in the State Senate, District 49. I, along with Representative Taylor, we're probably the transit users on this committee. I use transit on a fairly regular basis. And pleased to be here and happy to serve.
All right. First item on the agenda is the adoption of committee rules. This is our organizational meeting. I'm actually going to hold off on appointing subcommittees, although I don't anticipate they will change much from where they were last time. But we are going to adopt our committee rules. You have in front of you, I'm sorry, they say 2012-2013 term. We'll change that to 2013-2014. These are the same committee rules we had last time, with one change, and that is that I am asking the committee to drop the quorum from 5 to 4. We did have a couple of meetings last term where we had a little difficulty getting a quorum in, and so in order to allow our meetings to start on time, I am asking that the quorum requirement be dropped from 5 to 4. Any discussion on the rules? No.
At the appropriate time.
Is there a motion?
I move to pass.
Okay, there's a motion to adopt and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the chair calls the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. The rules are adopted. All right. We have two items on today's agenda. One is a presentation. Mr. Parker, is someone here from KPMG? I hope so. Okay. We have a presentation by KPMG of the roadmap for implementation of the management audit recommendations. First of all, actually, why don't we do this? If I can call Mr. Parker forward and Mr. Daniels as well, I would welcome you to give us a welcome, since this is our first meeting of this term. For members of the committee, I'm glad to introduce you to Keith Parker, the new and outstanding general manager of MARTA. On your, well, all right, we'll give him a round of applause. and Fred Daniels, also outstanding, the board chairman. Allow you all to say a few words of welcome and also introduce any other board members who are in the room.
Well, thank you. We did not expect that type of introduction this morning, but we accept all accolades as they come forth. We also have Harold Buckley, who is a member of the MARTA Board of Directors, that are here. And I'll make sure I'm not omitting anyone else. Good morning to the Martoc Committee. Good morning to the new members who are here. We are excited still about Keith Parker and the energy that he is bringing to our organization. We have done, I guess, in the short period of time that Mr. Parker has been here, he has met with many of the members of this committee. He's been meeting with the leadership of the state, he's been meeting with our jurisdictions, he's been meeting with the business community, and he's been meeting with stakeholders and community activists. We want to hear from everyone who has a vested interest in MARTA, both our owners and stakeholders, because we are trying to move this system to an area of sustainability. One of the aspects that will be talked about today is the KPMG study that was ordered by this board to look at how we can get to a level of sustainability, how we can look at growing the system, and look at how efficiently that the system can be run going forward. We feel very strongly that the opportunity that we are forging now with both the legislative branch and, again, all of our community stakeholders gives us that chance to put MARTA in a position where we can all be proud of the system and look for building our partnership towards eventual expansion of the system. So with that, I will leave it to our new CEO and GM to bring greetings also.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels, and thank you, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair. I think we're off to a pretty good start. We have had a great reception thus far, and one of the things that, as a newcomer coming to the area, that you're most concerned with is how vested people are in making sure the system is successful. And what I've seen up to this point has been universal, just a universal feel that folks want to see MARTA do well, and not just survive, but to see MARTA thrive. And I think if we all have that goal in mind, it's just working out then how we get there. And so, as the chairman, as Chairman Daniels had mentioned, we have been going out on a pretty aggressive listening exercise, where we've talked to folks at the highest levels of government, as well as small business owners, many of our customers, and people who just care about the transit system, and trying to make sure that no voice is left unheard as we craft this plan of bringing MARTA to fiscal sustainability, making our employees feel better about what they do every day, and then changing the perception of the agency to the point where one can feel really proud of MARTA and becoming a true iconic part of what makes this whole Atlanta region and the whole state special. We do have a couple of folks who I think, Mr. Chairman, you'd like to hear from. We have with us first Robin Howard. He's our internal leader on the KPMG work. He has been working very closely with consultant groups and others, and he can answer and provide any information you may have regarding the roadmap. In addition, we have a couple of folks from KPMG themselves here, and they in turn also are available to answer any questions and talk to you about what we intend to work through this first 3 years, and then on through the entire 5-year roadmap. So with that, we can begin to take questions or hear from them.
Well, I do want to give members of the committee an opportunity to ask y'all any introductory questions if they have any. Any questions from members of the committee? You got something? Senator, hit your button. Senator, hit your button.
Oh,
Senator Miller.
Oh,
the other Senator Miller.
Oh, whatchamacallit. I don't know if this is, at some point, would be the appropriate time. But if you save questions, this might be a nice opportunity to make a statement. A week or so ago, the MARTA management and staff invited the joint committees of transportation for the House and Senate for a visit to the facilities. And I just wanted to comment on that, if this would be the appropriate time.
You may.
That meeting, that invitation spoke volumes about the approach that I feel like the MARTA management and staff is taking. And what was really spoken the loudest was the unheard word, and that was the invitation, the arrangement, the opportunity for a lot of individuals who probably have never used the system to go out and see the system and see how it works, and see the level of professionalism and the level of service that's being provided. And the fact that we're here today and we're talking about improving the level of service, improving the reputation, and improving the image of the service is really, I think, profound. And I wanted to thank the management for having us out there, both Mr. Parker and Mr. Daniels last week. Thank you.
I also want to express appreciation for that. Unfortunately, the chair had to chair a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee at that time, and that takes quite a bit of time to do. So what I am going to ask, because I do think it would be a very instructive tour for members of this committee, is for that tour to occur again and be made available to members of the MARTA Oversight Committee, so that we can, so that we can get that direct interaction with the behind-the-scenes work that occurs at MARTA. I think that that would be very useful, and I do appreciate the invitation to members of this committee and the House and Senate Transportation Committees that occurred in the past couple weeks.
Well, we will certainly do that, Mr. Chairman. We think any opportunity that people from the public, elected officials, and any other stakeholders get a chance to see our employees in action, that they come back impressed. And that's what I think you all had an opportunity, those of you who had a chance to do the tour, had an opportunity to see. So we will gladly do that at any time.
All right. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Senator Miller. All right, why don't we go ahead into the first item on the agenda, which is, or the second item on the agenda, which is a presentation by KPMG of the Management Audit Roadmap. Just as a prelude to this item, we, back in December, asked, right after Mr. Parker had come in to MARTA, what the game plan was for implementation of the management audit, which had just been released earlier in the fall. He did get right on that item as soon as he came in, and certainly I'm grateful for that. And KPMG did produce a very good roadmap for how the management audit recommendations might be implemented, keeping in mind that we want the KPMG audit to be something not that's put on the shelf, but that is put into effect and helps MARTA achieve some efficiencies that are very much necessary. I did say at the time that as soon as we had this committee constituted, the first item on the agenda would be hearing that roadmap. And so, Mr. Parker, I'll let you recognize the folks from KPMG who are here to do that presentation.
We will gladly do that, Mr. Chairman, and as just a couple of comments as we're bringing them up, and I'll ask Robin Howard from the MARTA staff, and then Kim Millen from KPMG to come up and discuss some of the details as it relates to the overall transformational roadmap. We are moving aggressively to implement as many of the recommendations as possible that for a number of reasons. First, as the chairman mentioned a little bit earlier, we know we have to change our cost model and several other things, and we're doing that, and we're trying to take advantage of this opportunity where we can get lots of folks input while at the same time making sure we do it in such a measured way that all the impacted parties will have a chance again to offer their comments and thoughts. During this first few months, what we've been able to do is go out and meet with all the potentially impacted employees and with the service, the people who are potentially impacted by the service changes. That includes our folks in our payroll departments, our folks in human resources, as well as members of the disabled community who could be potentially impacted by a change of service provider. So we've had opportunity to meet with the chairman of the Elderly and Disabled Advisory Committee as well as the members of that committee. We've also gone out and, again, reached out to a number of other folks who, again, we wanted to make sure we hear from as we move forward with implementation. In addition, the board, to show its commitment to this effort, has passed a resolution committing to moving forward on this transformational process. And I think it may be the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, to have Chairman Daniels read into the record that resolution.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On Monday, May 4th, at our regularly scheduled board meeting, we put forth the following resolution. The resolution supporting MARTA's strategic transformation. Whereas in an effort to develop a sustainable business model intended to position MARTA for the future, MARTA's Board of Directors commissioned a thorough review of current overall operational and financial effectiveness. And whereas such review resulted in the development of recommendations for cost containment, sourcing, and revenue enhancement initiatives, and whereas MARTA's executive management team has reviewed the recommendations within this review, as well as the corresponding roadmap, and has resolved to incorporate recommendations and roadmap into an overall strategic transformation plan. Resolved, therefore, that the development of a sustainable business model incorporating the management review recommendations and a corresponding roadmap into an overall strategic transformational plan is hereby endorsed by the Board of Directors of the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. Approved to legal by our internal counsel, Elizabeth O'Neill.
Robin and Ken.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning, Chairman Jacobs, members of MARTOC. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the things that we've done internally, and then I'll turn it over to Ken to provide you some detail with the roadmap.
Okay.
As Keith said, we
I'll also give.
I do apologize. My name is Robin Howard. I am the Assistant General Manager for Internal Audit, and I have been working with KPMG as a liaison between KPMG and MARTA.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
As Keith said, we engaged KPMG to provide the roadmap to implement their recommendations that were outlined in the Phase 2 report. We received that on January 15th. Since then, we've taken a look at it, and what we've done is we've actually budgeted for that. So for the very first year, based on the 5 items that KPMG has recommended, obviously there are some resources that Ken's going to talk about, both financial and personnel resources. So we've actually budgeted for that. We've also set up a cost code because you want to track all the resources that we use both internally and externally that are allocated to this effort. So we currently have an existing budgeted code that's specifically dealing with the strategic transformation. We have started the fiscal year 14 budget process, and in that we have allocated funds for the strategic transformation effort. As I said, we have engaged KPMG. We expect to get their first task order this week, later this week or early next week, that deals with them assisting us in setting up the governance structure for the roadmap. We've also created an internal transformation team consisting of financial analysts and budget experts that are going to be working with KPMG. When Ken gets up here and talks about the personnel needed over the next 5 years, and the roadmap spans 5 years, there's a tremendous impact on MARTA resources, and we have, Keith has made it clear that he wants the best and the brightest internal people assigned to this effort. And so what we're doing is we're getting ahead of KPMG. We're actually assigning personnel from various offices and departments that we expect to be affected. Keith and some of the senior leaders have actually met with staff internally, staff that could be potentially affected, to discuss the transition and to discuss the impact. He's also met with the union leadership that's here today to discuss the potential impact. And as Chairman Daniels said earlier, we have gotten a resolution supporting this effort from our board. We intend to go back to the audit committee to ask for adopting additional funds for this effort, because we currently, even though we have it in the budget, we have to get board approval. And so those are some of the internal items that we've done. I've also been working very closely with KPMG and anything that they need, just making sure that we get that set up internally. So as soon as they come on board in about a week or so, MARTA is ready. We have our team set up. We have the budget identified. We do have a plan in place internally, and we're waiting for some additional assistance from KPMG. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ken Millen.
Good morning. My name is Ken Millen. I'm with KPMG. Just in personal introductions, a 53-year Atlanta resident. I always have to think about that for a minute. And really watch MARTA throughout the years and have been a customer of many times. My firm actually has been working with MARTA over the last 2 to 3 years, doing periodic management audits, but most recently through April through October, roughly, of last year is when we did the detail work that led to this transformation roadmap. And in my field at KPMG, what I specialize in is a field called shared services and outsourcing. So generally, what we're trying to attempt to do is the very difficult task of how does a company really effectively and efficiently run its business, particularly from administrative functions and back office functions. When we put together the transformation roadmap, we really looked at 47 areas of opportunity and targeted somewhere between $60 and $120 million of savings. In the transformation, and that was annual savings, by the way. In the roadmap, and I think this is a very important point, every step of the way, the amount of investment required was included. So when you look at this financially, we looked at what it's going to take to achieve the roadmap, and I think that's important as well. When it came to looking at sourcing opportunities, and that's always kind of a lightning rod in terms of potentially outsourcing things, we truly looked at those areas that, one, are proven in terms of there are vendors, people have been doing this for a long period of time, it's been successful. The other side we looked at is really, is it a core function of MARTA? Is it something that MARTA really does better than anyone else? We also did a lot of work talking to peers of MARTA in the transit world, and we did a lot of benchmarking, and all of that is in the reports that have been shared in the past. In terms of laying out the plan, there were 47 initiatives, or opportunities, I should say, which are consolidated down to 12 work areas, and those are laid out over a 5-year period of time. In terms of prioritizing these, we looked at a number of factors. We looked at the complexity of the area. We looked at the degree of risk. We looked at the return on investment because, again, this was driven to, by and large, make MARTA sustainable financially. So that was very important. We looked in terms of how do we create dependencies between the initiatives. We looked at the degree that there are people out there doing this in the transit world, and we looked at to what degree we needed detailed knowledge of MARTA's operations and environment. So there's a 5-year plan. The focus will be initially on setting up the governance, which is occurring starting now. The 5 initiatives that will take place in the coming year are the following. One is a procurement policy enhancement initiative. Frankly, there are a lot of rules in place today that make it difficult for MARTA to procure at times. Most governments have this problem. In the effort to make things fair, we actually make things inordinately complex, and time becomes a very much of a factor. The second area we're looking at is personnel cost efficiencies, and this, again, is a big issue at MARTA in terms of not only the cost of personnel, but the distribution of cost. And again, I think most of you on this committee know this, but heavy cost in the pension and health care area, offset at times by not, frankly, lower wages than perhaps there should be. But the distribution is problematic, and it's particularly problematic for hiring new employees and young people because it's not the balance needed. The third area we're looking at in the first year is revenue enhancement, and that's ways MARTA can generate additional revenue through assets it has today. The fourth area is comprehensive HR and payroll outsourcing. That area was picked because not only is it an area that it's widely implemented today, but it's also being done by other transit agencies. And the final one that's kicking off in the first year is paratransit outsourcing. And again, that's an area that that the studies we saw a lot of opportunity, although there is a great deal of work to be done in the detail in that one. So in our view, in KPMG's view, we have a viable plan, a way forward, and beginning execution. And that's, I'm going to conclude with that and just open it up for questions.
All right, and it's Mr. Millen, right?
Yes, sir. Ken Millen, M-I-L-L-E-N.
All right. So am I to understand, based upon what you said, that in putting together the audit and then putting together the roadmap, KPMG looked at what is being done successfully elsewhere, where there was a high likelihood of success in working with outside vendors.
Correct.
And specifically looked at it through the prism of whether or not it was something that MARTA could do better than someone outside the agency.
That is absolutely correct, yes.
Right. Questions? Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps to Mr. Millen and or Mr. Howard, I'd be surprised if there is a person in this room that does not want MARTA to take advantage of any and all efficiencies, whether they be suggested by your report or any other. The concerns that have been raised by some are mandating the privatization of certain services, particularly when, you know, as we've come to call it, it's a roadmap. I wonder, as we start to peel the onion, that we may realize that perhaps there may be a different tactic that we need to take to get to the same end goal. But in the end, in the interim, we've mandated certain services that may not really allow MARTA to take advantage of certain efficiencies.
I'm going to give a quick answer and turn it over to Robin. Each one of these initiatives has as a step one to reaffirm the viability of going forward. So while we spent months collecting cost data and opportunity and market data, there still is a step in each one of these to reaffirm the direction. That is there in terms of making sure that the plan is viable and executable. Robin?
I prefer to allow either Keith or the chairman to answer the political part, but what we will say, and I'll just reiterate what Ken said. It's important that we understand that as we go forward, the information that was gathered when KPMG did their study and their benchmarking using the vendors as samples, that was done about a year ago, and as time proceeds, the market environment changes. So as Ken said, we do have to go back and reaffirm that the savings that they estimated are still there. What KPMG did is they had a huge range, and they did that intentionally of estimates, so that when we went back a year or so later, that we'd still be sure that we'd realize some level of savings identified in those estimates. And so as we stand here, we're pretty comfortable that we will realize savings in those efforts. But again, we do have to reaffirm that as a step.
Senator Miller. Fran. Oh, sorry.
Just to address Representative Mitchell, from the perspective of the board, you know, when you're looking at the outsourcing, we want to make sure that we have the flexibility. I think that's the biggest key that we've expressed in regards to the outsourcing. When staff brings back the recommendations, if there is a way that it can be done more efficiently in-house, then we want that ability to look at it. If it can be done more efficiently through outsourcing, then we want the staff to have that recommendation that they can bring back to the board, and then we take that and move forward. Flexibility is the key in terms of looking at the information that has been put forth.
Senator Fran Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I'm going to ask the expert. Okay, I'm going to read you something, and I want your opinion on it, if I could, because we're talking about putting some things in statute to make sure this happens, which I'm sure you're very familiar with at this point. It's been in the two newspapers, and you've had discussions about it. And I understand the comments about flexibility, but I want your opinion on each of the services I'm going to outline. If you, without any doubt, you believe at this point that privatization is the way to go. And I'm talking about private contractors for the provision of the following services: accounts payable, payroll processing, HR benefits administration, employee recruiting and staffing, employee data and records management, telephone maintenance and support, information technology service desk, end-user computer support, workers' comp claims administration, customer care telephone hotline, paratransit bus service, and the interior cleaning of buses and trains. Now, these come out of your reports. Right. These come based upon your experiences. And if we're going to be doing this under statute, that we will do this by July of 2018, in your opinion today, and there's no guarantees down the road, I understand that, should all of these services be privatized?
You really are putting me in a tough place here. When you pick all of those that you picked, with the exception of one or two, are very, very proven in the marketplace, and I think MARTA would be better served to get them externally delivered. So, and the ones I'll be as specific as I can.
That's okay.
When you got into the things like benefits administration, payroll, employee recruiting, data management, accounts payable, information technology help desk, end user computing. These are generally outsourced or sourced today, because in many large firms they've actually built their own internal shared services operations, but they've done it because they have a huge IT operation. They have offices all over the world. So and we do that a lot. We do that with other organizations. But the ones that are in here, they're in here for a good reason, because we've studied them at length, and we really think there's an opportunity for MARTA to do them more effectively and concentrate its efforts on its core skill sets of operating the rail and bus systems that we all need to have done effectively. So the ones that I would be concerned about until we do some more work is paratransit, because we found great range there. There are other peer organizations today that outsource paratransit, and MARTA's tried it in the past, and it didn't. I don't know how it worked out, but so there are some where more study is definitely needed, where I wouldn't answer unequivocally yes, but the vast majority are there because we spent months studying this and talking to the
One follow-up, if I may.
Yep. You may, Senator Miller.
When we get to looking at this legislation in the Senate, I would appreciate it if maybe you could make yourself available, because I think if there's certain ones that you're not definitely sure about, we don't want to mandate something that may not be the right thing. I understand. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but that's why you work for KPMG.
Well, again, being cautious in all of this, we want steps every step of the way that are in this plan, but they are here because we think this would serve MARTA to do what's in this report the best. So
thank you very much.
That's the best I can do.
I appreciate it.
Senator Fort.
Good morning. I just want to be clear on what KPMG's role is going to be moving forward. This 5-year plan you're talking about, if the legislation that is the subject of this discussion, it goes into effect, and there's this 5-year plan privatization put in place, KPMG will be involved in that process. Is it true? Is that not correct?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Parker.
Mr. Chair, that's actually more of a question for me.
Okay.
And the MARTA staff. KPMG is assisting us in this early months of the transition from a analysis to the roadmap. But the future implementation of the 5-year roadmap is actually up to the MARTA staff and board. So we are working on packaging those opportunities are leading us through that transformational process as we speak.
So let me ask a question for KPMG. This is a question I think they probably can answer best. You all want to be involved in that?
We certainly have a lot invested in this, and we'd like to see it be successful. And as a business, we would like to be involved in it, sure.
And that's the issue for me. The question I have is that a conflict of interest for you all to put together this information and then be involved in implementation? You don't have to answer it. That's a policy question. But the issue for me is, is there a conflict of interest in y'all putting together a study which y'all are going to benefit from on the back end? You can respond to that or not. I have a follow-up
Every bit
question.
of work we do gets us into this area. What's important is we don't do any of these services. And in fact, our whole value proposition in this type of work is that we are assessing the market and helping an organization decide what vendors to select as they go forward with this. And those are where the real dollars are. Our advising
and I hope you didn't.
Minor one.
I hope I wasn't implying, because I didn't intend to, that you do any of this business, but there is the business of
yes.
putting this in place.
Yes, sir.
I have a follow-up.
It's my understanding that MARTA intends to drive the train, so to speak, on putting this in place, Senator Fort.
I understand, and thanks for that clarification, Mr. Chair. I'll take that to heart. Just a follow-up question. These things that you all are talking about, are these things that the board could do without being mandated by the legislature? Are these things that the board, in their wisdom, with the general manager's input, that could put in place now without being mandated by the state?
Certainly, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Butchmiller.
Would it be a safe statement overview that KPMG is helping establish the business model and MARTA's implementing the business model?
Absolutely, that's very
kind
well
of an
said.
overview.
And I just would like to add, because again, you're asking some very, very good questions, and I want to be very frank and open about this. This is our work. I'm doing a project right now at the Architect of the Capitol in Washington. I'm doing exactly the same kind of work. I've done this work for the FBI, the U.S. Air Force, the state of Florida, the state of Texas, the state of Utah. Exactly the same kind of work we're talking about here. So this isn't, I've been grilled before about some of these things, but this is what we do. This is our life.
You're a busy guy.
I am.
Thank you.
Any further questions for KPMG or for MARTA staff? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation today. Senator Franmiller.
You might want to make sure the new members all get copies of the KPMG report if they already have it. If they don't
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll certainly do that. It's a very good it's a very good document, very thorough, and definitely worth a read. And the road, we'll make sure that both the audit and the roadmap. The roadmap's a separate document, and frankly, I don't think it's been distributed to members of the committee. I know individual members have received it, but we'll make sure that all members of the committee receive it. At this time, I also we have a couple of members that came in a little bit late, and we went across and allowed everyone to introduce themselves, district and name. So, Representative Mitchell.
They need no introduction.
I know they need no introduction, but nevertheless, I'm going to afford them this.
I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing.
I'll still recognize Senator Ford to do this.
Billy Mitchell, I represent the 88th Legislative District, which is DeKalb County.
Senator Ford.
My name is Vincent Ford. I serve the 39th District, which goes from Sidney Marcus Boulevard on the north down to Union City. I'm glad to be on MARTOC once again, Mr. Chair, and I have about 6 or 7 MARTA stations, rail stations in my district. I have a population that depends on MARTA very, very much, and I'm glad to be here with y'all.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize Representative Gardner sitting down there. If you want to just introduce yourself, you're always welcome to join us, Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Pat Gardner, representing the City of Atlanta, a member of the Transportation Committee, and appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. At this time, we are going to have a public hearing on House Bill 264. The reason that I wanted to do this is that, sometimes as legislation comes through the General Assembly, we don't have enough time in the actual Senate and House committee hearings to hear from all members of the public who want to speak on a particular piece of legislation. And so I wanted to afford folks that opportunity here in the MARTOC committee, particularly because a lot of the folks who are sitting at this dais are decision makers in the House and Senate. What?
That's a metropolitan throne.
There we go. It's a new word, Senator Miller.
That's Brookhaven.
That's Brookhaven speak. That's right. Are decision makers in the House and Senate on this particular piece of legislation. But before I do that, I'm going to relinquish the chair to Senator Miller, our vice chair. And I am going to do a brief presentation on the bill and enable members of the I want to do this so that everybody in the room has the context on so that everybody in the room has the context on the legislation itself. I'll also enable members of the committee to ask the chair questions regarding the legislation, and then we'll move on to the public hearing. So Senator Miller, if you'll take the chair.
Best decision we've made all day.
You can instantly see the meeting is running a lot sooner.
That's right. Okay, Mr. Chairman, you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
All right.
We're working off of LC 390400S.
All right, and this is the House version of the bill. Obviously, it has not started to be considered in the Senate, although it's my understanding that it's been assigned to a subcommittee of the Senate Transportation Committee. The Senate will likely begin taking up this piece of legislation next week after crossover day. What you have in front of you is a comprehensive reform measure for MARTA. The reality is that we disagree a lot on big issues like this down here at the General Assembly, but I hope that members of the public and members of this committee and members of the House and members of the Senate take this legislation in the spirit in which it is intended. And that is that ultimately we all want to see MARTA expand and grow and thrive. In order for that to happen, though, MARTA cannot remain in the financial condition it's in today, running budget deficits, and with its current spending model. Now, it's clear to me that Mr. Daniels and Mr. Parker recognize that, and for that I am grateful. There was a time at MARTA where that might not have been as easy as it is today. And so I do want to recognize and commend them for that commitment. But by the same token, MARTA is an agency that, through inertia, for more than 30 years, has come to the financial situation that it's in today. And so it is time to take a look at real reform. And we did have a piece of legislation last legislative session that failed on literally the 11th hour of day 40 that had a couple of the provisions of this bill, but is not nearly as comprehensive a revision of the MARTA Act as this particular bill is. It does have three basic cornerstones to it, and then I'll also address various other provisions that are contained in the bill. But the three basic cornerstones are these: privatization, pension reform, and a debt ceiling. Let me hit all three of those in turn. First, privatization. We are not, and I look forward to the discussion and the public comment on this. We are not looking to privatize MARTA in its entirety. We're not looking to privatize the entire bus and train service. What we are looking to do is see through the implementation of the very good recommendations of the KPMG audit. And what KPMG, as you just heard, did was take look at MARTA in its entirety and take those aspects of MARTA's business that have been privatized or handled in the public sector with a high likelihood of success, and make a recommendation that they be outsourced. And so that entire laundry list of services is in the bill that passed the House and required to be privatized within 5 years. 5 years is the time period that's in the roadmap that will be distributed later to members of the committee. Now, on this particular provision, I would say that as policymakers, we ought to be in trust but verify mode. I believe Mr. Daniels and Mr. Parker's commitment to making these important things happen. But the reality is that MARTA is where it is today through 30 years of inertia. 30 years of just being left alone to grow as it has, and it's time to change that. And the other issue is that we haven't had a general manager who has lasted 5 years at MARTA. I hope we have Mr. Parker with us for 5 years. But we haven't had in recent memory a general manager who has lasted 5 years. And so ultimately, we look as policymakers for for MARTA to follow through on that commitment. And so the language that's contained in the bill with regard to privatization is very broad general language. It does not prescribe how privatization is to occur. It simply says that these aspects of MARTA's business that were identified by KPMG shall be privatized within the 5 years that's provided in the roadmap. Now, I've had people suggest to me more prescriptive language, okay, as this bill is wound through the General Assembly, that, you know, you ought to require MARTA to do it this way. And I've rejected all of that. I've rejected all of that because ultimately I don't want to be in the business of micromanaging MARTA. I do want to require as a policymaker that MARTA do the things that will allow it to operate more efficiently, but not tell MARTA how that is to be done. So that's the privatization piece.
Mr. Chairman, isn't that the part that they gave us a dollar amount for the KPMG study, didn't they, in savings, didn't they, for the privatization?
They did. The KPMG, as you just heard, I mean, the KPMG audit, with all of its recommendations, is aimed at saving annually $60 to $120 million, which, as a function of MARTA's budget, an operating budget of about $400 million, is a substantial savings. As Representative Lindsay, the majority whip, said on the House floor when we debated this bill, that is a lot of bus service, that is a lot of train service. And so I think we need to look at it through that prism. Right. Then we have the pension reform piece. I will say that based upon my conversation with the Department of Labor today, it is my opinion that this provision is going to need to become more advisory than it is written right now. And so I will look forward to, but nevertheless, okay, I am committed and I believe that, you know, we have government agencies up and down the line, federal, state, and local, and all across this country, that recognize that we can no longer afford the large unfunded obligations that come along with defined benefit plans, and that the gold standard is and should be defined contribution plans. Now, unfortunately, we have, I mean, I say this because it takes out of the realm of what we can do as policymakers, you know, the ability to affect that change through a mandate. But unfortunately, there is an inability to prescribe that in the MARTA Act, because if we do, Section 13C of the Federal Transit Act says that MARTA's federal grant funding, which makes up about 1/5 of its budget, will be jeopardized. So we're likely to be more advisory and less prescriptive as the bill moves through the Senate, but I am nevertheless committed to that as an objective, and I hope that MARTA's management is committed to it as well.
Mr. Chairman, you're speaking about the part about lines 245 and on about the no defined benefit plan.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I mean, and we have some saving language in there now, but based upon the conversation with the Department of Labor today, it is my opinion that we probably need to be even less prescriptive than that.
One comment on that. One of the things we've done at the state, so everybody understands this, state employees, for example, we have like 3 different plans. We had a plan at one time, the state employees would get like 90% of their income. Then we went to a plan where they get about 60% of their income. Then we went to a hybrid plan, where they get about 30% plus the balance of it is in a 401k. So these are some of the options that people are looking at today. And in the private sector, what Chairman Jacobs is telling you here, there's very few large organizations anymore continuing to have defined benefit plans. We've actually done that at the state for our own employees. People that were hired, I think it was after 2009, but I'm going from memory, went to this new hybrid plan. So this is the trend, whether we as citizens like it or not, that's where we're going in this country. is to more of the defined contribution 401k, if you will, plan. And for the state employees, we did some kind of a hybrid. So that's probably one of the options that MARTA would probably be looking at, I think.
Well, and in fact, Senator Miller, MARTA has already done that for non-represented employees.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah, which
on that issue, I just want to be clear as a point of order. You're saying that that language on pensions that is present in your sub, you're going to revise that language?
I am likely to recommend in Senate subcommittee and present language that is more advisory and less prescriptive than what you see in the bill right now.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. That's 245, 246. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
And finally, a debt ceiling. And I suppose I should, I mean, I know what's in this bill by heart, so I probably should point out the language.
Is that about
I'm sorry, that's in Section 4 of the bill.
Yeah, section.
All right.
In Section 4, line 330, I think is where he's going to go on this. Line 330.
Toward the end of the last term, we asked a lot of questions about MARTA's debt service. The reality of MARTA's debt service, MARTA's debt situation, is that the way it is right now is completely unsustainable. MARTA's debt burden for the next 10 years is anticipated to increase every year. There is a MARTA board policy that says that it can't go above 45% of prior fiscal year's sales tax receipts. But the reality of that is that sales tax receipts are projected to increase every year. Whether or not they actually will increase is another story, but they're projected to increase every year. So MARTA projects that its debt, it's the whole dollar amount of its debt will increase from year to year. 42% of sales tax revenues, folks, 42 to 43% of prior year's sales tax revenues, keeping in mind that the state is constitutionally limited to a 10% debt service of prior. Now, mind you, sales tax revenue is not all of MARTA's revenues, but still, it's a startling number, and it is a huge chunk of MARTA's budget. So I asked Mr. Parker, and I say this, I want to be very clear about this. I'm not suggesting, as someone brought to me after the House floor proceedings, that MARTA endorses this approach. They don't. They do not. But from my standpoint, I specifically asked Mr. Parker, and he came with Davis Allen, to meet with me with various scenarios. You know, what would that look like at 40%, 35%, and 30%? And I achieved, based upon that conversation, not an endorsement by MARTA, but I achieved, based upon that conversation, that in achieving some efficiencies through the other things we're requiring to be done in the MARTA Act, that MARTA could achieve a stepping down of that debt burden to 40% after 3 years and 35% after 6 years. Now, they may disagree with that, but as a matter of policy, I think it's important, and I think it's important for this reason. MARTA just did floated some new bonds. And those bonds are 30-year bonds, and they were used for capital maintenance projects, stuff that is being fixed today with 30-year bonds that my kids will be paying off for stuff that was fixed today. I view that from a policy standpoint and sustainability of MARTA and its debt burden to be a big problem. And so that is why the provision on lines 330 through 335 is in the bill. And I definitely think, based upon the numbers that I saw, that it is achievable if MARTA achieves some other efficiencies over time. And that goes to privatization and other matters in the bill.
Mr. Chairman, if we remember right, the model we saw before when they made their debt was going to be like $2.4 billion. Something wasn't without the changes. Wasn't the number like 2.4 in the chart that you
I'll let
showed us?
Mr. Parker answer
Was that right,
that
Mr.
question.
I'll have to go. I don't want to give a.
But you gave us that chart, and it was going from like 1 point.
In the chart, it was 2.338 out.
Yeah, like up to $2.4 billion. So everybody understands what we're talking about. The magnitude of the debt if we don't make some changes. Okay, so and it's just not sustainable as the chairman said. So when we talk about that, go ahead. I'm sorry. Let the expert talk.
Oh, I'm not the expert. I'm just a banker.
Boy, you really sort of set yourself up on that one. But go ahead.
Let me speak to why, and the chairman did say that MARTA disagrees with this provision.
He's on. Would you speak a little louder?
The chairman did say that MARTA and management disagrees with this provision, and I need to speak to that directly if it's appropriate at this
Sure.
time. Okay. Obviously, debt for MARTA has grown over the years, and I mean that goes without question. We're not debating that piece, but when you're talking about such substantial principal reduction, where are those resources going to come from? When you're talking about, when we in the past we've been eating at the reserve, and that's obvious to everyone, then you have to, I guess, you have to take the assumption that everything that we do from the perspective of the KPMG recommendations will be successful. Typically, that's not normally the case. We believe that we're going to have success, but from a success of 100% success is not realistic.
That's realistic. That's fair.
So if you look at that and you're saying you're asking for a principal reduction to 40 and 35%, and the overall goal of the agency, as was stated, is the get back to what we do, which is core transportation. You're talking about at least attempting to expand services that have been cut and making sure that our ridership has more in the way of shorter headways in terms of our rail service and shorter times waiting at the bus stops for buses to come. If the determination of this committee is such, in terms of recommendation, to take those savings and plow them into debt reduction here immediately, which you're talking about in the next 3 years, then you're talking about taking the principle that can be looked upon in terms of the expansion of service and only looking at debt reduction. And that's not where we want to be in terms of looking at MARTA sustainability. We want to make sure that we sustain the system in terms of looking at the expansion of service and making sure that there is opportunities there for, again, to restore service. Debt reduction is very important, and as a banker, I will tell you that any debt going forward has to come before our board and has to be approved by management. Management's recommendation in terms of an overall strategy, not just a strategy of paying down debt, but a strategy in terms of looking at the overall core, the entire system, how it relates to expansion of service, how it relates to the ability to pay down debt, because I'm doing a double negative if I'm stealing from my reserve to pay down debt. We don't want to be in that position. Let me also say that MAP 21, which is the overall transportation legislation, has not been finalized. I mean, really, that was an 18-month, I guess, back in September, or maybe a little earlier, don't hold me to the date, that was approved, and we don't know what that final legislation is going to look like. And unfortunately, we've found that the feds send us unfunded mandates.
That's federal legislation he's speaking of, is what he's talking about. Right. For everybody who doesn't know, that's federal legislation.
Sure. So from that perspective, if something is put in there and our funding is obviously, a fifth of our funding is tied to federal funding, and we can't meet one of the mandates that's put forth, but then at the same time we're violating state law, you pick your poison. Again, flexibility is what we're asking for here. We don't want to increase, without a thorough plan for management. We don't want to increase our debt unless we have to, but there would be a plan for that increased debt. It would be a plan for its reduction and a plan for the payment in accordance to all the pieces that come into play here. KPMG, in terms of the expansion of service, and whatever that debt need is, if it's for refinancing, if it's for expansion, if it's for equipment, understanding that we still have several $billion of assets that are still in need of repair that haven't even been addressed yet. So again, what we're asking for is not to mandate us to a certain position without a underlying strategy that's been placed before it.
Mr. Chairman, you don't mind if we do this right now, do you? I mean,
Actually, if it's okay, let me just finish up just a quick overview of the rest of the stuff in the bill.
Why don't you finish, and then we'll come back to this.
Other provisions in the bill, as you'll recall, in House Bill 1052 from last time, we had a restructuring of the MARTA board that both staggered the board terms, which is not currently provided for in law, and also shifted some of the appointments to give some input to the mayors in, who drive transportation policy in Fulton and DeKalb counties in some areas these days. So one appointment goes to the DeKalb County mayors. The two North Fulton appointments go to the North Fulton mayors. We also give the South Fulton mayors some input on the South Fulton appointment as well. We do increase in the bill MARTA's discretionary ability to award contracts without a competitive bidding requirement from $100,000 where it is today to $200,000. That is grounded. That's a request from MARTA, first of all.
Right.
I don't know that they request $200,000, but that's what we gave them, and it's grounded in the KPMG audit recommendations because they are looking to streamline and make more efficient MARTA's procurement practices. And so, for example, if MARTA has to go out there and obtain widgets to fix a train or to fix trains, en masse, doing that in smaller chunks on a discretionary basis is easier than buying the stuff in bulk and having it maybe be obsolete later on. So that's the policy call there. Now, as a trade-off from that, we have a provision in the bill that requires for any expenditure over $5,000 that the expenditure to a single vendor within a 12-month period, that those be listed on a schedule, attached to the board agenda, and that the board be able to ask questions about those various expenditures that are listed on the schedule. This is to get the board's eyes on more expenditures. We do from time to time have expenditures that come up, and for whatever reason they occur that this committee ends up asking questions about, and ultimately we want the board's eyes to be on those expenditures. So that's the trade-off for the increase in discretionary authority. We also do streamline the collective bargaining process a bit, change some reporting requirements to MARTOC, and that pretty much, I think, covers all of the provisions of the bill. Now we can open it up for discussion, and I do want to have the public hearing as well.
Mr. Chairman, I've got 2 or 3 questions here, but going back to this point here, on the percentages that we came up with, the 40 to the 35, et cetera, I can't recall, and maybe it was in there. I know they talked about financial controls to a degree, KPMG. Did they talk about how to get a handle on this debt service? They did not cover this aspect, did they? And I think they are gone. But
no.
Maybe
no.
Did they talk? They did not talk about this because again, this is probably an area that a lot of us probably we've used them for everything else. If we're talking about the long-term viability of MARTA, certainly the financial constraints, the debt service, et cetera, somebody ought to be able to say what's the most definitive plan in order to do this. Because I understand your concern. That's what got us in trouble in this entire country is too much debt. So I think you got a valid point of question of how we're going to deal with it going forward versus balancing that against operations. So I got some members with questions. Senator Butler, what's your number? Is it 26? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the bill and listening to the chairman explain this, and it sounds like to me that part of the debt ceiling is like the 50-50 match. Am I correct in thinking that is the same kind of mandate as the 50-50 match?
Well, I'll just speak to the new provision. And the biggest issue...
Ms. Parr, would you explain the 50... We had new members on this committee. Would you explain about the 50-50 when you...
Actually, I'll defer to the banker. He's better.
Well, actually, I should, before you all do that, I should probably mention that I did gloss over this. There is a 3-year lift of the 50-50 split in the legislation to take it through 2016. The 50-50 split is the requirement in the MARTA Act that of every dollar of sales tax revenues that come in, 50% have to be used on the capital side of the house, 50% can be used on the operating side of the house. So.
Is that similar?
Well, yes. So to answer your question directly, the concern we have is just on flexibility. As the CEO of the agency, and then as the board with the responsibility of making sure we run the agency as best as we possibly can, we all have the collective goal of making us as fiscally sustainable as we can be. And I will be presenting to the board in the coming months an ideas about how we would reduce debt and so forth over these coming 5 years. The thing that we don't know is what we don't know, and I think the chairman touched upon that. 3 years from now, there could be some accident in Boston that the feds then say, we want you all to implement a new safety measure that costs a significant amount of money. That may require us to go above our projected debt level for that for a given year. If we have a prescriptive measure like this, it does not give us the opportunity to be as flexible as we need to be in a given year. So our goal, of course, would be, again, to keep the debt going down, but having the flexibility to respond to these unforeseen requirements, requests, accidents, what have you. That's what we'd ultimately want.
I have another question. I don't know if you know this or not, but how does MARTA's debt ceiling compare to the Georgia Department of Transportation?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But a follow on that, do you know about versus the other transit systems like BART and MARTA and the Metro? Do you have an answer? Do you all know that answer?
We could pull together some information.
That might be helpful, I think.
Yes, some of them have a significant amount of debt. The legacy systems, the Bostons, the Clevelands and those areas, they do have significant.
Well, the ones that the only reason I say, because they, at one time when I moved here 30 years ago, the same token for MARTA worked for the Metro in D.C. and BART where I came from. So those are comparable systems from a standpoint of the type of the trains, everything else at that point in time, so versus a really, really old system. So if you could get that information to committee, I think that would be helpful.
But my point was DOT has probably a higher debt ceiling than MARTA, but they're not being asked to do something like this.
Okay. That's right. Senator Hill?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Mitchell?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just add, first of all, Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate you bringing forth the legislation. I've worked with you quite some time and always appreciate your willingness to consider opposing views, and I think that has been accommodated in your legislation. I think the chair of MARTA certainly has spelled out some of the concerns that I brought up earlier in the flexibility. If you will, let's just take the provision that says shall provide for the privatization of certain services. We're talking about 12 aspects. If you would go with me through your process, that if I read a KPMG report for a similar system, and at the end of the day, they were something like 34% successful in their suggestions, and they were trumpeting that. If you would give me your sense of what would happen if they got into these 12 areas, found out that in a particular area, it would not be any more financially sustainable to continue down that road, or may even be detrimental. What would be the mechanism by which MARTA could then get out of this edict?
Well, first of all, okay, I think that is unlikely. I think that's highly unlikely based upon the process that KPMG went. Hold on. I don't.
Yeah, let's have order, folks, okay?
Members of the public will have their say in this hearing, and I encourage you to stand up and speak if you're interested in saying your piece. first of all, I think there is a high likelihood of success on those enumerated items. That's the first thing. The second thing is there is always because we built in the 5-year window, there is always the ability, if something changes, to, I mean, one General Assembly doesn't bind a future General Assembly. Right. And so there's always the ability to amend the act. We're doing it now, and we can do it again. 5 years is a long time. And finally, you know, I'm certainly open to discussion with the senators, where the bill now lies, about building in perhaps a safety valve in that language. I'm open to that, okay. But I want you to bear in mind that we still have the ability to change the act, and 5 years is a very long time. So it needs to be viewed through that prism.
Sure. Senator Ford.
I think the fatal flaw here is that, you know, this revision of the MARTA Act does not take into consideration a central issue. 90% of the KPG study talks about efficiencies. How can we privatize? How can we outsource? I'm sorry. Mr. Chair, I don't believe the microphone is on.
You're 19. You're just talking quieter in your old age.
No.
Senator Ford, see, check the gray button on the back there.
Okay. There you go.
I didn't purposely mute you.
I'm about to say, Senator Miller.
Never let it be said that I didn't help you out, Senator
Thank you,
Ford.
man. The point I was making was that the fatal flaw of this discussion is that we're not talking about a central issue, and that is revenue enhancement. 90% of the KPMG study talks about privatization. Doesn't talk about, there are only about 5 pages in the study talking about where do we get money, you know, because you can cut, I mean, MARTA's a bare bones system now. Quiet is kept. The people I represent have difficulty getting around the city on MARTA because we've cut. It's a bare bones system. Now we're cutting into, you know, I mean, I heard what you said, Mr. Chair, and I think you said that there may need to be more cuts to service. And so to talk about revising the structure of MARTA and then putting on top of that more restrictions, I'll be honest with you, at this point, you know, and Mr. Parker, don't pass out at this, but at this point, being held hostage by the 50-50 split, you know what I want to say? Take it. Keep it. Don't even put that on the table. You know, because this is an annual scenario, the 50-50 split being held hostage by it. We need to talk about what we can do to raise revenues. And I don't think we should take it out on the people who work at MARTA, the represented employees, and their pensions. And I'm glad to hear what you had to say, that we finally found out that 13C really does have some teeth, and that you can't cut folks' pensions and other things. And I wish we had talked about that before. Finally, Mr. Chair, one of the things that disturbs me on another level is that the appointment process here in this bill kind of segregates the appointments of MARTA, North Side and South Side. I don't think that helps anybody to divide the appointments between North County and South County in DeKalb and in Fulton County. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think it's divisive to do that. But I just wanted to make those comments, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that? First of all, Senator Ford, I appreciate your sentiments. But first of all, the changes in the makeup of the MARTA board are not made through this legislation. They were made in House Bill 277. We are simply carrying forward where each of those members hail from. Now, we have changed up who does the appointing in some instances, and that is because ultimately we have a thing called home rule in our state constitution that says that where transportation, where we have cities, okay, if they're given the power over transportation policy through their charter, they call the shots on transportation policy. And so folks who, and it is this way everywhere among the appointments. It's this way that are in the bill. It's this way in North Fulton. It's this way in South Fulton. We provide for the mayors in South Fulton to have some input. And it's this way for the mayors in DeKalb County. 1/4 of the citizens of DeKalb County live in a city, so we give 1/4 of DeKalb County's appointments to a caucus of the mayors of DeKalb County, where the people have given the authority over transportation policy to a municipality. We give the municipalities the power to have representation on the MARTA board, so that the citizens can truly speak through the local government they have selected. That's the first thing. The second thing is, on the matter of funding, you know, I got this question a while ago I got this question on the House floor about, you know, well, would MARTA be in the condition that it's in today if Cobb County and Gwinnett County had decided to join the system more than 30 years ago? And my answer to that is, I can't speak to what Cobb County and Gwinnett County decided to do 30 years ago. But if I went to Cobb County and Gwinnett County today and said, would you like to help us participate in a system where your tax dollars will be used to pay off 30-year bonds for current capital maintenance, they would look at me and say, are you crazy? And at the end of the day, growing and expanding MARTA is the aim of this bill, recognizing that we will never get there with MARTA in the financial condition that it is in today. And that is the reason behind this bill.
Okay. Good. Representative Pruitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am green to this committee, so be patient with me. But, Mr. Parker, this is a question for you. I heard you state that that you had a plan to reduce the deficit. Did it get down to the 35% level?
No, I said I would be presenting a plan.
Have you got the plan ready now? Do you know what the numbers will be?
We will be presenting a plan to the board as a part of the overall budget submission and so forth that would then look at our 5-year outlay, and that will include ideas about how we can inject some debt reduction into our overall efforts.
When will that be, and what do you think your goal, or will you have a goal in mind?
Don't want to jump ahead because we have to additional data analysis that's necessary with it, but within the budget process, so it'll be within the next few months.
Okay, but you do, one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. You do understand, though, that there are provisions for emergencies to where if we put the 35% in and we'll go forward with that, this board can always be come back to change that. There is a fallback. I mean, it's not a live or die situation.
As currently written, I don't believe that.
No, I'm sorry, your MARTA board. I'm sorry, not this board. I apologize.
Correct. The MARTA board would have an opportunity to change and be flexible, but I believe the way that legislation is currently written, that flexibility is not there.
But also, is it not true that the legislators also understand a predicament such as that, and you can always come back to legislation to make that change? Is that, maybe I need to ask the author of the bill.
Okay.
Well, first of all, the legislature can always make that change. That's right. And certainly I would expect that if there were a true emergency, we would. And in fact, I would commit to you that as long as I'm here, I'll lead that charge.
The real emergency might be with the federal government, and if they acted in less than 6 months, I'd be stunned on anything. So, again, I think based upon past record, we usually have times to react to any that they deem emergencies. Senator Ligon. And we'll take one more after Senator Ligon. Then we're going to go to public comment, because I know people come here to speak, and we don't take away from your time. Go ahead, Senator Ligon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, being new to the committee, I would like just a clear statement of the debt issue that we're dealing with. Total debt, total revenues from all sources, percentage of revenues that are being taken to service the debt. What is the optimum model? If you were looking at this as a business, what
I think we can get that information to you. We've seen it. Again, I apologize because not everybody's seen this information. We have most of that. I think what will be important for as we go forward on the bill and particularly with the Senate and the subcommittee on transportation, that information be provided by MARTA so that people can evaluate this plan that Chairman Jacobs has come up with, and they can get you the information in advance of that. So we will get it to every member of the committee. That shouldn't be a problem. They have those numbers.
Would they have a general statement of what that would be with them now?
Well, I don't know. I asked earlier and I didn't quite get the answer. So.
No, we did not come prepared for that particular question, but we will get that information to you shortly.
You don't have anything just off the top of your head so that I can have some context while we're listening?
Senator Liggett, I might have an answer for you. Hold on 1 second.
Senator Liggett, we had multiple hearings last year about this, and it was all presented to us in document format. I'm sure that MARTA will be able to provide that to all of the new members, and I think we should be refreshed on all the members of MARTOC, as well as it provided to the Senate Transportation Committee. I think you absolutely need to have this information, but this has all been put in evidence over the past 6 months.
Okay, last question. Senator Butler?
It's me.
You or Senator Hill? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to address the Senator Fort's comments and Chairman Jacobs' response, because I agree with Senator Fort that MARTA is an asset to the entire metro Atlanta region, and I want to make sure that that's said and known. I live in Cobb County. I represent a portion of Fulton. We do need to talk about additional revenue to spread MARTA's footprint, but we're not there yet. And to Chairman Jacobs' concerns and comments, any business that is looking to expand and bring in investment capital has to present to the investors a viable business plan and a way forward that's fiscally responsible. And I think that Chairman Jacobs' bill has some measures in it that can set forth a path where once we become fiscally responsible, then we can win the day on the argument both to the state and potentially to other counties to invest in MARTA. But we have to do the one before the other, and that's why I think it's important to address our financial issues so that we can one day have a good hearing about how we continue to invest in MARTA for capital expansion throughout the metro region. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I'm going to give up the mic now to Chairman Jacobs. But again, if understand, each of us up here understands the importance of mass transit, whether it's bus or rail. If we didn't understand it after we watched what happened in Clayton County when that bus service was suspended, what it did to those people, none of us want to see that happen. So please, if you all would keep that in mind.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Let Mr. Daniels, Mr. Parker clear out. We've got some folks signed up to speak. I'm actually going to also let anyone who wants to speak who's not on the list do that. But let's start, first of all, with Tom Bauer and anyone you want to bring up with you, Mr. Bauer. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Tom Bauer, and I represent the ATU Local 732. That's the MARTA workers. With me is the president, Curtis Howard, and Jim Callahan from ATU International. I guess I'll start off, and they can add anything. This has been a great discussion. Thank you. I'm sorry that the other two senators had to leave because I was going to start off by apologizing to some of the representatives who are on transportation because I'm going to be a little bit redundant. but I'm going to be as brief as I can. First of all, Chairman Jacobs did mention 13C, and I'm not going to go into that in detail, but just to say that, well, let me start off by saying that the three provisions that we find most troubling of the bill are the mandatory privatization, the pension provision, and the streamlining of the arbitration, and I will get to those shortly. 13C came about because most transit systems were private in this country, and so when federal funds were being used, Congress determined that those workers who had collective bargaining rights already, that those rights would be protected. And that's where the 13C comes from that Chairman Jacobs mentioned. I mentioned that just because transit systems used to be private, and there's a reason that there are public entities involved now, and so I wanted to get that point out. A couple of things on the pension, and I'm not here to argue what the drift is. I will say this, that I don't believe that the pension for MARTA workers right now is underfunded, and secondly, I do want to bring to your attention that that there has been a wage freeze for 6 years for MARTA workers, so I think that is worthy of consideration. Now, on to the point about mandatory privatization, and well, let me say one other thing about how MARTA got here. Chairman Jacobs has mentioned the term 5 years for a long time. Some of you know me from wearing another hat here, and it took us 5 years to get in a transportation funding bill that new transportation funds could be used for operational purposes for transit. I would submit to you that MARTA and other transit systems in the state are in the position we're in because it's an unsustainable model. Georgia, and I may get this backwards on the 9 and 10, I believe that Georgia is only one of 9 states that do not provide any operational funding to transit, and the only one of the 10 most populous. Don't hold me to that. I might have them flipped around. So I would just submit to you that that is one of the key problems that we have here, and why MARTA is forced to have service cutbacks at times. I'd also like to point out that MARTA does occasionally get state funding, but nothing of substance. I would also point out, and I don't want this to be misunderstood, because I support Greta, I support anything we can do to reduce traffic in the Atlanta region, but there is $8 million in the state budget that both chambers will be looking at next week, in the next 10 days, to continue Greta because of the loss of federal funds. And that's, as far as I know, the first time the state has put anything significant in terms of operational funds. Chairman Miller, you mentioned Metro. Metro, the trains do look similar here in Metro, but the Metro system has one heck of a lot of federal funds, and it's got a lot of substantial funding from D.C., from Maryland, and from Virginia. And I did want to point that out. So, the other thing I really want most of you, particularly the senators, to hear is that MARTA right now can do privatization. They can negotiate that. They can negotiate the pension. The problem is when you do the mandates, and Chairman Jacobs, thank you for your comments on the savings language and the pension and looking at that further, because we thought that did need further clarification. But the key point is here that MARTA can already do this. The federal law requires a loss of federal funds unless MARTA can continue to unless union workers can continue to collectively bargain on that. So I would submit to you that really this bill doesn't need to mandate privatization. It doesn't need to mandate anything about the pensions, because those
Mr. Bauer, if I may for a second, I will just tell you that I just came off a conference call with Representative Riley present, where the Department of Labor, without offering an opinion and without giving me any kind of authority to speak for them, does not seem nearly as troubled about the privatization piece as you do.
Okay, fair enough. We can agree to disagree to that. And
well, I mean, you'd be disagreeing with the federal agency that makes the decision on that point.
Well, we will certainly be in contact with them too, because we have certain understandings, you know, in conversations we've had for them, particularly at the Washington level. So
again, I don't speak for them, but they seem, but they certainly sounded less troubled by it.
Okay. Well,
than is being presented to the General Assembly by others.
And I would also submit to you, sir, that there wouldn't be any doubt. We don't need to mandate it, and then we wouldn't have any doubt one way or another. I do also appreciate the fact that the question came up about paratransit, and the gentleman from KPMG mentioned that as a potentially, I don't know the word he used. I don't want to put an adjective in his mouth, but just so that you will know, in terms of paratransit, MARTA is restricted by federal law from charging twice the normal fare. So paratransit is a losing proposition, and so whatever model you use, that is going to be a difficult thing to talk about, to deal with in terms of saving funds. But mainly, I'd like to say that MARTA can already do this. Federal law requires at the imposition of a loss of federal funds that collective bargaining continue on those key elements of bargaining. And I don't think you need to jeopardize federal funds by micromanaging MARTA to begin with.
Anyone?
Yes, good morning. I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Jacobs, because you did not entertain any part of the bill that talked about giving the governor the right to select a judge, a retired judge, when we have a process that's never been used before. And why would you want to change that process? I'd like for you to speak on that. You haven't spoke on that in any of the hearings that I've been in.
The retired judge, again, a retired judge of the Superior Court, certainly Court of Appeals or State Supreme Court, I think will do a perfectly good job as an arbitrator. I have yet to appear before a judge who is not well versed in the issues that are before them at the time. Now I have a question for you, Mr. Howard.
Well, that was
no,
you didn't answer
hold,
my question.
Hold on.
My question was,
I have a question, and I have a question, and I'm going to ask this question because nobody had the guts to come up to me and hand me one of these flyers. But luckily there was a photograph of one in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution yesterday on their website. And one of our committee aides here at the Capitol was kind enough to transcribe it for me. And it says the following, and this is being handed out to MARTA riders as they get off the 5 Points MARTA station, as they get off at the 5 Points MARTA station. State politicians are jeopardizing the service, safety, and affordability of Atlanta's bus and rail service by proposing legislation that would allow a foreign company to operate MARTA. Your hard-earned tax dollars to ride the bus or train to work, school, and other daily tasks would be sent out of Atlanta to a foreign country. Profits and the bottom line would come first, while riders like you and service will take a backseat. Outsourcing MARTA could mean cuts to service with fewer bus routes and rail lines, longer waits for bus and trains, increasing fares, profits being sent overseas to line pockets of investments at a foreign country, For more than 40 years, we've kept the public transportation system. Join us, keep MARTA public. Now, I want you to point me to where in this legislation it says that we are privatizing the rail and bus service. Where in the bill is it?
Well,
because you're telling the public that.
Well, first of all, I'd like for you to lower your voice at me. First of all, that's very disrespectful. As you as the chair, that's very disrespectful. So that's first and foremost.
You're handing this out to MARTA riders, correct?
I came here.
Are you handing this out to MARTA riders?
I didn't come here for you to disrespect me.
Answer my question. Are you handing this out to MARTA riders?
Well, this is what I'm going to tell you. This is the position that the local's going to take, the local union, and I hand it to everybody on your committee, and this is ours. And we would like, at this time, I'd like to have the same courtesy that when KPMG reports to the Senate and speaks to the Senate, that our guy who did a rebuttal, which is Mr. Scalara, have an opportunity to talk to the Senate as well. And this document here will answer all your questions about how the union views what's going on around the country and the KPMG report. So to answer your question very directly and not dance around it, I think everything in the flyer is correct.
Well, everything in the flyer about privatizing MARTA's bus and rail service is flat out a lie, because it is nowhere in the bill. Mr. Bauer, you are an experienced lobbyist at this Capitol. You have been here for years. Tell me where in the bill we are privatizing MARTA's bus and rail service on behalf of your client.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I did not see that flyer. This is not strictly a union. I think there are several organizations part of that, but you are correct. There is nothing in this bill that mandates privatization of the bus drivers and the train. But privatization is a very serious issue, particularly in paratransit and several places where it is mandated right now in the bill where there are represented employees.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bauer, I appreciate the document you handed out to us earlier. Would you confirm that all of the representations you've made here in this document are speculative and not certainties? They are all possibilities that you are providing for conjecture, but are not certainties.
I would respectfully ask for you to point what your specific question would be.
You say may, and these things may happen, but in no case can you testify to me today that for any certainty that any of these outcomes may occur. Is that not correct?
Again, Representative Riley, this has got several bullet points, and if you'd be good enough to point one out.
You pick any one of them.
Okay. Well, the first two are sort of procedural.
But even in that, and you speak to an inquiry, but you cannot determine the outcome of an inquiry, can you?
I cannot determine the outcome of the inquiry. And Mr. Walls, would you be good enough to?
No, that's not necessary.
No,
I really just want to make the point.
In fairness, you're getting to some federal process, and I can point out that we didn't have enough room on a one-pager, and perhaps that's.
All I'm asking is for clarification.
Okay.
Is that the components of this document are speculative, not prescriptive? We cannot sit here today and say any of these scenarios will occur in fact, can we?
I think I could say with regard to the pension language, for instance, there have been similar rulings by the Department of Labor.
Well, then I would appreciate
extrapolating on that.
I would appreciate you do reference a California outcome. I would appreciate that if you could share that with members of the committee for us to understand how an action may have resulted from the proposed before us.
We'd be happy to provide you with California ruling.
And I appreciate that. But more importantly, I think that it's very important that while we have these conversations today, that when representations are made, the representations are merely speculative. There is no guarantee or certainty that can be discussed before us today of an outcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fort.
You know, the fact of the matter is there are people, and you could dispute this if you want, but I've been around here 17 years, and I know what the game is. I know there are people, even in this room, you know, one, paratransit is a service that is being a rider service that is proposed to be privatized. Let's get that out the way. But let's be very clear. There are people in the sound of my voice who are only here because they want to, after the privatizing of the back office, they want to move into the privatizing of the buses in the rail service. They're getting paid big money. They've been in this room. I think they're out in the hall right now. So, Mr. Chair, to intimate that this isn't about privatization of rail services, it's not in your bill except for paratransit, and that's enough for me because those people are the most vulnerable people that MARTA serves, folk who have disabilities, folk that I've stood up before when MARTA tried to change some of the rules. So that's in there. And there are people, you know, people getting paid even as we speak to try to get privatization. They might put an amendment on the floor, but they're probably going to wait until some time when they think that it's a better time to do the privatization of the bus and the rail. So, but I really am concerned that, because I don't know who sent out the flyer, but to object to advocates putting out their own information about, because as far as I'm concerned, what KPMG done said and what some of management said is as speculative as anything.
All right.
But I know one thing, you know, people ought to have the right to do what? Stand up and speak truth to power and say what's on their minds. And I think, Mr. Chair, the tone and tenor of your approach to Mr. Howard was inappropriate.
Well, no.
Thank you, Senator.
No. First of all, nobody is curtailing anybody's right to free speech. I remember a day, Senator Fort, in this committee when the chairman of this committee would cut off microphones. And that has not happened once. It won't happen for a member of this committee. It won't happen for a member of the audience. And we're going to have a full play. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want to underscore the fact that this flyer, I'll get to you in a second, Senator Miller. I want to underscore the fact, I mean, yes, the bill provides for privatization of the paratransit bus service, but I want to underscore the fact that this flyer that I read to you is being handed to people stepping off of buses, regular MARTA buses, and regular trains at the 5 Points MARTA station, and it tells a lie about the provisions of the bill. Senator Miller.
Well, some of us are up here because we're concerned about, not privatization, we're concerned about the long-term viability of MARTA. And I'm concerned about the economic consequences to not only the region, but that means the entire state if MARTA fails. We have a model right now. We've had a third-party consultant hired by MARTA, KPMG, come in and say, look, we've got to change the way we do business. Nobody likes change, folks. I'm 63 years old. I certainly don't like change. But the fact remains, okay, we cannot continue to do business the way we're doing it. And so no one's out to get anybody. I don't know who the people in the lobby are out there for privatization or not privatization. These are recommendations from a reputable, now Big Four firm, KPMG, about some things we can do to get our financial house in order. No one can dispute that our financial house has not been in order. It's one of the reasons Mr. Parker's here, to help us do this. So all of us up here are going to try to make this thing work. Yes, is there going to be some disruptions in people's lives? Absolutely. But if we don't take some steps today, okay, MARTA is not going to be successful. And if MARTA's not successful, I will tell you, the region's not successful. And the economic consequences are almost as much as when we talk about school systems losing accreditation. So keep in mind, all of us, yes, you know, people hand out flyers, maybe some of the things aren't true in them. I don't particularly like it if I don't think they're true. But that's not why we're here. We're here because we're all trying to come up with a solution, okay, to make MARTA viable. And I hope that you all realize that the people in the front of this room, that's what we're about here. And let's not lose sight of that. You know, we've been here a long time. By and large, our behavior has been pretty good. So just, you know, let's just tone it down here. Let's let people make their comments, and we'll go forward. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I still would like to have my question answered about the governor appointee, because the language that's currently in the MARTA Act had never been tried or used before, and now you have an amendment. My question is why?
And my answer is that we are looking to make the collective bargaining process, which right now is a bit of a Rube Goldberg machine. You know, you got this first step and then second step and all kinds of different bells and whistles streamlined so that we can get to a solution over collective bargaining as quickly as possible so that we can move the system forward. That's the answer to the question.
Mr. Chairman, can I, for the benefit, because the senators have not heard this, and I know we're trying to be argumentative, just as background, the bill does strike language for a fact-finding process, which I believe MARTA was seeking the streamlining, and we have no problem with that either. But the language also called for binding arbitration with the arbitrator being selected, being either approved by or a member of the American Arbitration Association. That language is being struck, and it is retired judge. So our concern is that while we have the utmost respect for the judiciary, this may end up be a situation where you have somebody arbitrating who does not have experience in labor disputes. Just for the background purposes.
And in closing, I do agree with you, sir. And the MARTA workers have worked with MARTA through collective bargaining. Even when we disagree, we have not one time challenged the system. After whatever our final outcome was, we continue to go to work, and we continue to support a company and an employer, which most of us have worked for a very long time. So I totally agree with you, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jim Callahan. I represent the Amalgamated Transit Union out of Washington, D.C. And I'll share with you some of my concerns, and I can put it in formal language. But as I said before, at the Transportation Committee and Subcommittee, I am honored to be here. It's a privilege for me to be here, and I respect everybody's views on this committee. And yesterday I saw grammar school kids coming out of the Capitol, and I remember when I was a kid and we went to the state Capitol, and they showed us how a bill becomes a law. And this is how a bill becomes a law. Do research, listening to the public, both sides, and I am very happy to be here. Thank you very much. Just a few things, and I'll formalize this in writing, but I don't want to debate the details of the report, but Senator Mr. Jacobs, after the last meeting, you were kind enough to spend time with us. And I asked you, and I've asked Mr. Parker this, and this is the major concern for any elected official in this state. Do you have the detailed numbers from the report, not the aggregate numbers, not the guesswork, not we might be able to save $60 million. Do you have the actual numbers? And you said no, quite honestly, and I thank you for that. Mr. Parker said no. In January, we met with him and his staff. So in fact, public policy is being made now without the elected officials having the actual raw numbers. And here's what we were told by Mr. Parker in writing. KPMG considers that proprietary information. I beg to disagree. The public paid for that document. The public deserves, and elected officials deserve, to see the numbers in that document, because going back to the original question, suppose they find out when they bid out to the vendors that, in fact, like with other systems, it doesn't always work. And we're going to give you this report that we commissioned. So the only way for public officials, in my view, to decide that in the State Assembly, in the State Senate, and the Governor is to ask Mr. Parker and KPMG to give us the public documents that they base their report on. It's a simple request. It's not complicated. But a couple of other quick things about MARTA and your oversight, Mr. Jacobs, which I'm glad that there's oversight. 30 years of inertia. I thought Washington was bad. Where's everybody been? Not you, sir. A couple of things we've asked Mr. Parker for in January. We asked him for reports of the debt. He promised it to us in writing. We haven't received it yet. What are the interest rates on the debt? Can those bonds be renegotiated? I don't know the answer to these questions. We're just asking. Can the bonds be renegotiated? I mentioned General Motors, and I say to you in this report, if it's, and one of Mr. Parker's top aides told us that this was a bankruptcy sale. He's in the room today. It's a bankruptcy sale. Okay, let's discuss that. If it's a bankruptcy sale, everyone shares in the pain, not just the workers. Everyone, the bondholders, the electric company, the fuel company, all the suppliers, all the consultants, staff, the workers have already made their sacrifice for 6 years. They haven't had a raise. So if it's a bankruptcy sale, ask the bondholders for General Motors what they got. I think it was 25 cents on the dollar. Ask the banks what they got. Ask any bank in any bankruptcy court. So that's how he described this, as a bankruptcy sale, and you're actually dismantling, in our view, you're dismantling MARTA. So we're looking for questions about, we've asked Mr. Parker to give us, and he promised it to us, we don't have it yet, a listing of all their real estate holdings, the appraised value of those holdings, the possibility of any of those leases being renegotiated like you would in a bankruptcy sale, the possibility, which was discussed, about selling air rights at MARTA stations and MARTA properties. I'll leave it at that. I I would ask you to Google West Palm Beach, which right now today is having a major discussion about outsourcing their mobility paratransit, which is an unmitigated disaster. And the public officials who agreed to it are now saying, maybe we should take it back the way we did with Dave's Transportation. It just didn't work. The only way any of this can work, in our view, quite frankly, is to reduce the wages of the workers, to cut service, and basically to find ways to save money, and that's service, wages, and safety. I'm not pointing out, I'm not mentioning anybody in detail, but KPMG said they met with vendors. One vendor was on the property inspecting what's out there. Okay, listen, I'm happy that MARTA, I think MARTA should have had this report, but to discuss the fact that they have not been running MARTA as a business for 30 years, I got to tell you, is kind of shocking to me. It isn't a business as such, but clearly it should be run as a business, and it hasn't been for 30 years. There's nothing wrong with hiring a management report. But if public dollars are paid for it, we should have the right to see those raw numbers, to see, in fact, what their deal is. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm taking up too much time. I would just say one final thing, Mr. Jacobs, or two final things. You said the 401k is the gold standard. I saw a guy up in Buck County yesterday standing on the street. We buy gold. Today's price is not the same as tomorrow's price or Friday's price. So it's the gold standard, all right, depending on the price of gold. When I graduated high school in 1965, all my friends, parents, told us to get a city job, when city workers were considered public servants and had a high place in our society, unlike they do now. The reason for that was we're all kids of immigrants. I had a free college education at City University of New York. And people in our neighborhood took a city job not to goof off. It didn't matter if they were raking leaves in the park or picking up the garbage or being police officers or teachers or firefighters or nurses. What mattered was, or transit workers, what mattered was in 1965 that you took lower wages for that city job because at the end of your 30 years you were going to get a pension. You also had free health insurance, which I know is another whole debate. But the point I'm making is the pension problem is a nationwide private business problem. People are living longer. We all know that. So to say that a 401k plan, you know, we used to talk about privatizing Social Security in the late 80s, 90s. We don't hear that anymore because we know there'd be an unmitigated disaster. So a 401k sounds good. And I'm glad you called it the gold standard because I agree with you. That's exactly what it is. The price of gold changes every 5 minutes on the stock exchange. And workers shouldn't have to be subjected to that. And finally, I would ask you to share with us the names of people who you spoke to this morning, their titles at the Labor Department, and if you spoke to the Federal Transit Administration, because since you injected it into the record, I think we should all know who you spoke to who don't share these concerns about federal funding. Because the City of Atlanta should share those concerns about federal funding. It's $70 million a year. So again, I thank you and I respect your work and I'm happy to be here. And I'll answer any questions.
Well, I'll just say on that last point that I am not willing to do that, and I'm not willing to do that for this reason. Okay, first of all, there were at least 5 folks from the Department of Labor on the call. So I'm not sure I remember them all. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, you know, I get asked whether I do my due diligence on legislation like this all the time. And the reality is that, you know, you expect, and you asked me to talk, I mean, it was either Mr. Walls or Mr. Bauer asked me to talk with the Department of Labor, and I said that I would. Okay? Same thing with the bill itself. We didn't have this bill without me sitting down in my law office with Mr. Daniels and Mr. Parker and going through the provisions and getting some feedback from MARTA. They don't like everything that's in the bill today, but it's a better bill from their standpoint for having had that conversation. So we did our due diligence there. I promised y'all that I would do the due diligence with the Department of Labor, and I've done that. And you know, I mean, certainly the people who handle this stuff at the Department of Labor and their titles are known, and you're welcome to go talk with them as well. There were at least 5 people on the call, though, all right, from the Department of Labor.
On on the other issue of ATU.
You might pull your mic to you, Senator Ford.
I'm sorry. On the other issue of ATU requesting information from MARTA, would the chair be willing to ask MARTA to provide that information to Mr. Howard? It seems to me to be a reasonable request. I mean, I think we've even asked for some of the same information, and I just think it would be helpful if ATU Local 732 was provided with the information that they're asking for. Is that reasonable?
Well, we certainly have the ability to request documents from this committee. In fact, the committee has subpoena power, though we don't use it. But we do have the ability to request documents. So what I would ask you to do is put what you're requesting in writing to me, and I mean, I didn't take it all down. So put it in writing to me, and then I'll certainly take the requests under consideration.
Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Can I
Mr.
just
Howard.
close on one thing with the pension? I don't think it's been said, and I am a trustee on the plan for about 7 years now. One thing that concerns me, and I know that you said that there's things that you're going to possibly do to it, but I just want everybody to know, when you take out of the plan members in the future, you make it a funding issue because nothing's coming into it. You strictly rely on investments, and those investments, if they're not up to par, as we've seen with 9/11 and the economy dropping and everything else, will put a burden, and the burden will go to the employer. Because right now we're roughly around 98% funded, which is really good, probably one of the best plans in the state of Georgia. So for you to move forward with not putting any participants in it, will at some point in time in the future put it possibly in an unfunded, and then the state and MARTA will have to shore it up. So I just wanted to put that on the record and say that I understand your reasoning behind it. I know we disagree, Mr. Chair, but I don't think I have ever had an opportunity to just let everybody know that. So thank you very much.
And I appreciate the comment, Mr. Howard. I would say that, you know, we can't, I mean, at some point, you know, a defined contribution plan is more efficient than a defined benefit plan. I think that has proven itself out over time. The problem is that at some point, in order to get to a defined contribution plan, you have to cut off the defined benefit plan. So, I mean, that's a policy call that we're taking under consideration, and you and I disagree on the approach, but I do appreciate your comments. Representative Taylor.
Just two quick things. One, I'd like to hear more public input. I think we've talked about this a lot. But the other thing is, to Mr. Callahan's point, the debt projections and all that have been provided to this committee, I think, in our beginning of January meeting. And I don't think anybody's trying to, that's available. I know that MARTA does not have that today, but that's been provided to the members of this committee, I think our January 12th or 9th or 10th meeting, out for 30 years. So that's all out there. Again, they're projections, but I think they're very well done, and nobody's trying to, you know, hide anything or keep anything from the public at all, but that's all I'm going to say.
I wasn't implying that you're hiding anything. I said Mr. Parker promised it to us on January 13th. We're still waiting for it. I didn't mean members of the committee at all.
Well, again, if you
but it's been provided to the committee. It's out in the open.
If you are proposing for your requests to become requests of the committee, I need to see them in writing.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity. I do want to say that having sat through several meetings of subcommittees of judiciary, I would never consider you, ever accuse you of not using due diligence in researching our legislation. And I'm very appreciative that you had the opportunity to talk to DOL, and would love to, you know, discuss that further. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Thank you, Mr. Howard. All right, next up we have Jim Stokes.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jim Stokes, the Executive Director of the Livable Communities Coalition, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. There are two issues that I want to address. First is the mandated privatization of services, and the second is the limitation on debt service as a percentage of sales tax revenue. The overall theme of my comments is going to be, I think we all agree that MARTA has hired an outstanding new general manager, Keith Parker. And just as any business, we need to give the new CEO a chance to implement his program and his plans. Okay, starting with the mandated privatization. We've heard from Mr. Parker and Mr. Daniels that MARTA is going to implement privatization. They're going to do it in a way that fits in with Mr. Parker's management of MARTA and his overall program. So my first recommendation would be to delete that provision from the bill and give Mr. Parker a chance to manage. If that doesn't happen, there are three problems that we have with the bill that we think can be addressed. The first is that implementation of the privatization provisions could lead to the loss of federal funds. I think this can be dealt with fairly easily by putting language of the type that's in other provisions so that if there's something that conflicts with Section 13C, MARTA will not lose any federal funds because of that. The second is that the services to be privatized must be profitable to MARTA. They should not be at a loss. And our recommendation on this is that a provision to that effect be put into the legislation so that MARTA, and we've seen this a number of times. We've seen it in the city of Atlanta when they outsourced the water management and then it was taken back. That privatization is always difficult and there should be some protection that it not end up as a lost proposition. The third is that MARTA's employees be given the opportunity to compete with the outside private contractors to provide better and more cost-effective service. The bill does not allow that, and we feel that it definitely ought to. So secondly, on the debt service provision, debt service not equaling a particular percentage of sales tax revenue. First of all, we have the same situation of putting Mr. Parker in the position that he can manage his business, manage his company, if you will. We are concerned that this provision will put MARTA at risk, that MARTA needs the flexibility to respond to a major capital need or other major expenditure. And let me give you a real example. With respect to the DC Metro system, when they had safety concerns because of a crash there, there was a federal requirement implemented that cost MARTA several $100 million. That is the kind of thing that I think there's a concern here. There's also a concern about possible other major capital outlays. And I understand that you've said, well, the legislation can always be amended, but I'll point you to the 50-50 provision that's amended only when there are other things that go with it. And I come back to where I started, that we need to give Mr. Parker the opportunity to manage his business by deleting both these provisions or modifying the privatization provision in the three ways that I've mentioned to you. And I think that the legislature can look at that after a year, 2 years, and make some judgments, but it really ought to be the CEO that makes these calls. Thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Stokes? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stokes, who commissioned this report?
I don't think that's from Mr. Stokes.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
I apologize.
Well, let me make very clear who I am. The Livable Communities Coalition of Metropolitan Atlanta has existed since 2006. We are the smart growth organization for Atlanta. Then we provided tremendous support for transit in the transportation referendum, and now what we're looking at is development around MARTA stations called transit-oriented development, TOD. So we are here as really an objective sort of voice to present what we think are the issues.
My apologies. I stepped out for a minute and missed a piece of it, but I appreciate your testimony.
That was referenced in the ATU's presentation that got handed out during Mr. Stokes' presentation.
Oh,
so.
okay.
Senator Hill?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification. Mr. Stokes talked about lifting the 50-50. In this legislation, don't you lift it for 3 years?
Correct. It does have, right now, the present relaxation of the 50-50 split that was adopted in House Bill 277, the Transportation Investment Act, runs through June of this year, and we are proposing to take it out to 2016. That was a deal we struck last legislative session.
Mr. Chair, if I might, what I was saying in the comment is every time the 50-50 restriction has been lifted for a period of 3 years, there's always a trade-off that goes, something further is required in order to do that. And I'm just saying to you that could very well happen if there's an exception, for example, to the debt service limit.
I see. Thank you.
Senator Ford.
Could, Mr. Stokes, you have your, I was out of the room as well, do you have your comments in writing?
I don't, but I can do that.
That would be helpful for me, I know. Thank you.
Anything further from Mr. Stokes? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Callahan, you're Mr. Callahan, right? You were up here already, so you're next on my list, so all right. John Keyes.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this morning. Thank you for the work that you're doing as well. This is very, very important work. I've heard, I apologize, I'm representing the Statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia. Those are folks from all over the state with physical and emotional disabilities, as well as the Georgia Motor Coach Association of Georgia. You've heard a lot of us versus them scenarios presented this morning. It seems to be a zero-sum game. Everybody wins something or everybody loses something. I've observed, though, that good transit systems, and I feel confident that MARTA is moving in this direction, have embraced the concept of something called mobility management. What that is a customer-focused. It's all about the customer, of course, within the bounds of economic realities and what is affordable and not, but it's customer focused. It isn't about who delivers the service, unions, non-unions, private sector, but it's about taking care of folks who are heavily reliant on transit, and as well who would like to be choice riders, have the ability to have different transportation options. What the concept is not is about who does the service, and good transit systems have, as noted, nationally embraced the concept. Instead of its being privatization and calling it privatization, what these systems have done is embrace the concept of public-private partnering, working together. It's a partnership where not everybody wins, everybody loses. Everybody wins something who's at the table trying to serve customers. Okay, where is it working? Ironically, it's working in union towns. How about that? Denver, I would hold them out as being the regional transit district as being one of the best in the country. And I've got some examples of use of private-public partnering where in that city that works and works well. And I think folks at MARTA who have become familiar with Denver would probably agree. They started in 1993. That is well after 13C rules and regs came into effect in the mid-'60s when the feds got into providing transit through public dollars. Chicago, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon. Folks, these are all union states, union towns, and it's working. And it's working as in partnership. It isn't all union, it isn't all private, and I would suggest perhaps that you might want to take a look at how we can y'all might fashion legislation along those lines. Let me talk about one side benefit of where this partnering works in those 4 areas that I just mentioned. We have in this city, in this region, 4 wheelchair accessible taxis, 4 to serve a population of about 5 million folks. Now, you don't know how many are needed, but you kind of sense that 4 is probably not enough. What they've done in those 4 cities, again, Denver, Chicago, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, they have partnered with the taxi industry, the taxi companies, private companies, to open up a bigger geographic area to create win-win scenarios. And they do this in conjunction with the regular, if you will, the regular public transit system. So it's it's a service that augments the public transit system service, and it does it well. And a lot of folks are very happy with all 4 of those cities. And somehow, in a city of about 4 or 5 million folks, and in a state of 10 million where we have a grand total of about 8 wheelchair accessible taxis, this is an idea that probably ought to be adopted and embraced all over the state, not just in MARTA. But that's my comment, sir. Mr. Chairman, members, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Keys?
Yes, sir.
Senator Ford.
Yes, sir. Mr. Keys, give me the name of your organization again.
Yeah, the Statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia and the Georgia Motor Coach Association.
Georgia Motor Coach Association, which does
shuttle bus service. In fact, they have several of the members of that association are working with Greta.
Sure. And so they would be a company who would be in line if the paratransit was, I'm going to use the word privatized. If it was privatized, your organization would be in line to get that business.
Possibly. Would love to be able to talk with public transit systems in that regard with MARTA.
Thank you.
Senator Hill.
Sir, thank you for being here. Was there any catalyst to those partnerships working in those states? Are you familiar with legislation that teed that up, or was it a natural progression?
Yes, sir. It varies by state and political culture as partisan politics changes and so forth. In Denver, they actually had a mandate for a fairly extensive period of time, a requirement of about 50% of, and they called it privatization in Colorado state law. Now it's down to, I think it's about 35% suggested. So it goes back and forth. Those other areas, I don't think there is statewide legislation, but I could be wrong. I don't want to be held to that.
Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Keys? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation today. Ayanna Bell. She's welcome to speak if she'd like. And Judy Woolheater.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm really grateful that you're all sticking out until the end of this hearing. I know you probably all have more things to do in the afternoon. My name is Judy Woolheater, and I am here as a member of the public. I care about MARTA a whole lot. You see my button, and I have my MARTA card. I've been told that in other cities where public transit was privatized, and perhaps that's a dirty word today, that fares were raised and that the frequency of trips was dropped, was lowered. We already went through that 2 years ago, or was it 3, when MARTA did some restructuring and limitation of their services. I believe that that crippled public transit. Those people who had the choice to do other than wait for the bus or wait for the train chose to drive their automobile. Those people who had no choice are still standing at bus stations and in MARTA stations, shivering in the cold like today, sweltering in the hot sun, having to stand there with an umbrella while it rains all over them. I think we need to think of those people, and I don't see MARTA as a business. I see it as a public service. Thank you.
Ms. Woolheater, just
Yes.
you do understand just a couple of things, and I won't subject you to a grilling of any kind, but you do understand that we're not. I mean, the bill does not provide for the privatization of the bus and rail service wholesale.
I've
correct?
heard a lot of discussion of that today.
Okay. And as well, I should point out on the paratransit service, and this might be educational for members of the committee, particularly new members, that first of all, the fares for paratransit service, I mean, there's a lot of talk about fares being increased and service cut. Specifically, with regard to paratransit service, the fares are capped. If I'm not, am I incorrect about that? I believe that. I'm sorry. They have to be no greater than 2 times the normal fare. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
But one thing I would add to that: the MARTA board legislates or governs how much fares and service and those things. It's at their discretion.
And it is also federally mandated, though, with regard to service, to provide the kind of door-to-door service that it provides.
That's correct. There must be what's called complimentary paratransit service for any regular fixed route bus service.
Right. So I mean, I guess the point is, particularly on the service side of the equation, the paratransit bus service is actually federally mandated to do exactly what it does. We would not be talking about a reduction in that service.
Well, sir, I beg to point out that I wasn't really talking about paratransit. I was talking about regular transit, and I know that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when I used to ride the train to work, and I had the privilege of having a bus that would bring me to the train station, and then subsequently I would need to walk to the train station, and I am a counselor, and I would see clients in the evening, and I would have to take the train and then walk in the dark to get to my home. And so those are the kinds of concerns that I have from my own personal experience. And I thank you all for your attention.
Representative Taylor? He waves. Okay. Thank you very much for your comments today. Does anyone else want to make any public comment? Yes, sir. If you can, either microphone is fine. Be sure to state your name and if you're with an organization.
Yes, my name is McKinley Woods. I'm a MARTA employee. I've been with MARTA 25 years, plus I'm an ATU member. I have a concern. Is the 1% sales tax that Fulton, DeKalb, and the city of Atlanta has been putting into MARTA system at this time. My mother and all my other relatives are taxpayer as well. So now if we are privatized out, how do that 1% plays with MARTA, the privatization of the city of Atlanta, or how do that work? Because I'm a little confused on that.
Well, I mean, the 1% sales tax is one of MARTA's revenue sources. I should also say, and this is not to, I should also say with regard to the penny sales tax, we have a lot of debate amongst ourselves on the penny sales tax and its role. I should say that, we had some testimony back a while ago from former Congressman Elliot Levitas, who was around in the General Assembly at the time that MARTA was created. And, at the time, there were no local SPLOST for anything. There was, the use of a penny sales tax, which was the state's taxing mechanism at the time. There was no education SPLOST or transportation SPLOST locally. Prior to that time, was viewed as a big give by the state government. Now, I understand where you're coming from in that you know, the penny sales tax is charged only in Fulton and DeKalb counties, and you pay it as a Fulton resident, I pay it as a DeKalb, or are you from Fulton or DeKalb?
Yes. Fulton.
Fulton. All right. You pay it as Fulton resident, I pay it as a DeKalb resident. But the reality of that sales tax is that it is a penny sales tax levied in the state's capital city. So I think we also do have to be mindful of the fact that, you know, everybody who commutes in to the city of Atlanta from Gwinnett or Cobb County or from suburban counties and works here during the day pays that sales tax when they go out to lunch, for example. People who come to Stonecrest Mall from Rockdale County, right next door, just over the line, they're paying the penny sales tax. People who come from Cobb and Gwinnett counties to Perimeter Mall and so on pay the penny sales tax as well. So it is a taxing mechanism given by the state. Now, we do need to address what happens next after MARTA achieves some greater efficiencies, but I think it's important that we kind of define the prism through which we view the penny sales tax, because it is paid by more than just Fulton and DeKalb County residents. And I say that as a DeKalb County resident.
Okay. Number two, being a professional operator, have operated in the city of Atlanta over 25 years, and the congestion of traffic has tripled, quadrupled at this time, being cell phones and accidents is taking place. And I heard a comment that was made in the chamber about bus service of time. Now, the speed limit is posted throughout the city, but for us to increase service to make from point A to point B, that means we need to start breaking laws and speeding, reckless driving. But as a professional, as a CDL holder, it is a lot of things that is on the line as of safety of our citizens in Atlanta, Georgia. So if we sit up here and we cut and outsource and cut, somewhere down the line, somebody got to pay the penalty for that. Because I think that you said that MARTA spent a bill or 30 bonds. They opened up some bonds, and your kids might have to pay for it for the next 30 years.
Well, they just did a bond issue for some capital projects, some of which were maintenance projects, and it was a 30-year bond issue. Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is because just about everybody sitting in this auditorium here has kids that has going to have to pay for what is being done here, somewhere down the line. And the legislators and the governors and the senators that we elect and put in office is making good deals at the time being. But further down the road, our kids are still going to have to pay. Correct?
Well, I mean, I hope we get to a point where MARTA is more sustainable and you know, and ultimately we're able to. I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Well, basically.
But I understand the point you're trying to make.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding that since it was said that a lot of deals is made in here that will push forth on the bills that is being presented as pertaining to MARTA, you have this decision to be made at this level?
Deals?
Well, deals may not be the right word because I'm not a smooth talker.
I don't know if I'm a smooth talker either.
Oh, I've heard some slick stuff up in here today. See, I'm just a straight up, I ain't got a problem putting the hammer to the head, just tell it like it is. So I was
well, a lot went into the legislation. I think that you know, obviously conversations with MARTA went into the legislation. Conversations, you know, today's conversation with the Department of Labor will be taken into account. There were provisions of a prior bill that were carried over into this bill. So there's a lot of pieces in this particular legislation, and frankly, not.
Deals.
You know, some of it's more governance related than, you know, than wheels on the ground related.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sorry, Senator Hill. All right. Anyone further, ma'am?
Good afternoon, Chair, Senators, Representatives. I'm with ATU. I am a native Atlantan. I grew up in the city of Decatur. MARTA was our means of transportation. So this is not just business. This is something that is personal to me. Growing up on a public system, a lot of times they were used for doctor appointments, different things that was viable to get from place to place. And I don't want to look back as a worker and deny somebody else the right because the fares are increasing. MARTA, City of DeKalb, Fulton County, City of Atlanta, we all have paid into the system. But we want the system to continue to work for generations to come. We don't want to jump out here with the KPMG report that doesn't accurately reflect our peers. It doesn't accurately reflect what we do. The numbers are not accurately adding up, which we're not even getting all the numbers. So I couldn't come to you and ask you for a service and not pay you what you asked for because you're going to say it doesn't add up. This doesn't add up. Only thing that we're asking is that you all open your minds and your hearts to understand that we come to make an honest living. We're not asking for handouts. We want to be able to work. We want to be able to have a pension at the end of our 30 years here. You know, it is when you play the stock market, as you know, it's stated before, it's a gamble. It's a gamble. And pyramids are illegal. And it's like the money we already invested, it dwindles away, and it's like a pyramid, okay? It benefits those that we paid into it already for the pension. But now that as of January, it dwindles away and it eats away, you know, our future retirement. And I do not want to be a greeter at Walmart or any other, you know, places where, you know, you want to be able to retire after you've done your service. You want to be able to look back and now see your children and your grandchildren look forward to going, you know, to an honest job every day. And if you contract out and outsource it, our biggest concern is that, not just for ourselves, but for the service that the community is getting. Because a lot of us have been workers at MARTA. I've been almost 20 years. And to see that the effect that it's going to have on the disability group, they already have tremendous issues rather than to worry about a high turnover rate from a privatized company, or whether that privatized company want to run on Sundays, whether they want to run hours, you know, to cut back. You know, they have enough on their plate as it is, dealing with health issues. And so our concern is not only for ourselves, but we're always thinking about the next person. And I do think Mr. Parker, he's come into a situation where things were tight for him. I do not deny that. But we were here at MARTA before Mr. Parker came, and we will be at MARTA long after he leaves. You know.
Well, we'd like to keep him around for a little while.
We would love for it to sustain, basically. We have a bigger interest, is what I'm saying. He could go get a job, you know, from city to city, but this is where we want to be, and there's something wrong with trying to keep the workers in-house instead of privatizing it, because I work with contractors. I did track maintenance, and I can tell you, working beside someone making $10, $12 an hour, no benefits, I'm making $19 an hour with benefits. I can tell you right now, you wouldn't be too happy if you come do the same job I do, but your value seemed diminished by a dollar amount. I don't think that's fair. And their work performance were where their morale was much lower. We had contractors that didn't take a value in their job, and in turn that night, father and son was killed at, I think it was Lenox Station, because contractors failed to feel important, and they did not take the value of doing their job properly, which was keeping the trains out of the way of the workers. That was their whole purpose. But they failed to do that. So it does not boost morale. We just don't want to see someone else have to be a sacrificial lamb because we're looking to save $1. We want to know, because of the KPMG report, can we do it cheaper? What about doing it better? What about doing it stronger? What about doing it longer? What about doing it safer? What about doing it right the first time? So we're not asking for nothing you wouldn't want, Mr. Jacobs. And out of all due respect, I know every one of you are brilliant people, because you wouldn't be sitting there if you wasn't. And you wouldn't want to be on this side that you're trying to propose a bill. You wouldn't want to be on that side. You would rather be on the side that you're on right now. I can almost bet my bottom dollar. The only thing I'm saying is have compassion, not just for us, but for future generations, because this system was built on hard work, honesty, sweat, blood, tears. Because a lot of us feel like you many days. We don't get to dress up and go to work. We have to dress down and go in and do a job whether we want to or not, whether the weather is good or not, whether we feel like it or not. Only thing that we're asking is take in consideration that we want fairness, we want equality, we want justice. A lot of things this great country was built on. We don't want to take away rights, we want to add to it.
Right. And ma'am, your name, just for
Nikita Howard.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
Thank
Howard.
you. Thank
hold
you, Mr.
hold on,
Chair.
we got a couple lights on here. Representative Taylor.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't think there's anybody up here that really doesn't want to have MARTA succeed. It's a huge economic development tool, not just for the metro region, but for the state. I mean, the state, we've got 9 million people in the state, about 6.5 million live in the metro area. I utilize MARTA all the time. My city, Dunwoody, you know, we've got a 50,000 person nighttime population. We have 120,000 people during the day there. Most of those folks use public transit to get in and out. This is huge to me. I want to see it succeed, because at the end of the day, if this fails, you know, we fail as a region. We fail as a state. And you know, we have different approaches to this, and I'm just addressing not anybody in particular, but we have right now an unsustainable financial model. We've got to make some tweaks. Where those are, and there's probably some middle ground that's going to have to happen, and both sides are going to have to look at this. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anybody on this committee that wants to see MARTA fail or put anybody out of business or out of work. But again, and I think Mr. Parker, and we've had these conversations, understands this quite well, that, you know, some things have to happen to make this work, to change up some of the operating procedures. But at the end of the day, nobody here, and I know, I think I can speak for all of us, wants to see this fail or not succeed, going down the line. That's all I can say.
Out of all due respect, going through the KPMG report back and forth, if I'm wrong, please forgive me, but I never once seen their recommendation on how to boost ridership. I never seen their recommendation on how to save on the history of saving jobs that they're cutting, because he made a statement earlier about he doesn't, give me 1 second, I wrote it down. But basically he made a statement that, I have to go back to it. Okay, forgive me, but I wrote it down. I hate to hold your time, but basically what we're stating is that we want to keep everything in-house, because if we pull out to the riders from other areas, because MARTA used to have a day where you could ride free, and it promoted family. It did a lot of things to attract new riders. Now what's being considered for as other sources, I haven't seen enough of that other than just a cut.
Representative Geisinger.
I don't think anybody wants MARTA not to succeed. In fact, we all would like to see it tremendously succeed. Representative Taylor made it very, very clear and spoke, I think, well for all of us, that we are here because we want it to succeed. No one has said today that if we don't succeed, if we don't make it viable, if we run out of money, all of you are going to be out of work. So we're here for you as much as we are for all the people out there that you're serving. Thank you.
Also, the mayor stated in his State of the City address that they use KPMG also as an auditor, but he did not go with KPMG recommendations. He went with other recommendations that was more viable to keep workers employed, and he went from a $2.4 million in reserve to $7.4 million in reserve. So even though he had this audit report, it did not suit what he felt best for the city of Atlanta. So they've had growth even though they did not go along with the report, and that's what he stated at the State of the City address. And I'm not going to
You're talking about apples and oranges, though. And
But isn't the report talking about apples and oranges when we're talking about our peers?
when you talk about the city versus MARTA, you're talking about two different things. And they're not at all alike. There's revenue sources.
I don't think any two things are alike, sir. I just think that what I'm saying is he stated that the KPMG report that he received, and we also received KPMG report, but what I want Mr. Parker to understand is that just because he was given this report, he still can go off of his, his own operational experience in order to make decisions. That's all.
Ma'am, do you understand why this committee exists? We are an oversight committee, and we are here to help Mr. Parker do his job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, sir, for your time. I appreciate it, and I pray that God really lightens your hearts and really see what the issues truly are for everyone. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Come on forward. We got two more. All right. Three more. All right. Let's get in line so I know what we got on deck. Also, the person who spoke before, Ms. Taylor. No. It was a gentleman. Oh, what's your name, sir? Just so I have it. Pardon me? Mac Kennedy? What? McKinley Woods. McKinley Woods. Okay, got it. All right, ma'am. Please state your name.
My name is Andala, A-N-D-A-L-A. Last name Curd. I am a MARTA worker.
Last name what?
C-U-R-D.
Okay.
I work for MARTA, and I'm also a member of ATU Local 732. And I just heard this gentleman say something to the lady right there, that you guys are there to make decisions. So my question is to you, instead of trying to pass Bill 264, when you put the bill, the T-slash out there, it didn't work. But it didn't work because you was going to charge Fulton and DeKalb County 2% and the other areas 1%. So why can't you go back and put a bill on the floor to charge those other counties that come into Fulton and DeKalb to ride MARTA the 1%? That would help MARTA a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments. I think I addressed that before, and I'm not going to go back into it. But the point is that the MARTA penny is not just paid by folks who live in Fulton and DeKalb counties. Come on forward, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is David Ward. I represent ATU 732. I am also a 11-year mobility operator, also known as Paratransit and Special Services. Wait for the attention of the chair. Oh, okay. Once again, my name is David Ward. I am an 11-year employee of MARTA. I am a paratransit operator. And I've been listening to a lot of the dialogue, not just today, but over the last couple of months. And I've been reading the reports and looking at all the dialogue, like I said, about the privatization and also the outsourcing of other departments. And I got a chance, an opportunity to talk to some of the senators yesterday. I remember talking to Ms. Butler and Mr. Hill over there. But I'm here today to really just talk about the pension as well. The work that we do on mobility is a very brutal job, and I know it may not seem like it due to the type of passengers that we carry, but the truth of the job is this. In my years of being a mobility operator, I have seen employees come in almost running, And after 5 years of service, they literally limp out on a cane, and I'm talking about as early as 30 years of age. I think lastly we had a operator, she couldn't weigh no more than 130 pounds, and a wheelchair fell on her. And that pretty much probably ended her work career as we know it. And this is not statistical data, this is actual true information that I'm giving you. The point of the matter is this, Chairman Jacobs, is when you're considering in the provision in House Bill 264 to eliminate the defined benefit of an employee within those parameters of those 12 areas that you look to outsource, I do hope that you actually find it somewhere to find some relevance to think about. I really don't like to cast anybody into that basket, and particularly my own department, but we do have some employees that's here today that have been severely injured, you know, working in that particular job facet. So I do want you to take time to really look at what you're doing and what you're really actually proposing, because like I said, in my line of work of being a union representative is that we don't deal in speculation, we deal in contracts and agreements. And when I started working here 11 years ago, MARTA agreed that if I met a certain requirement to retire, that I would receive a certain benefit. Now, what's happening now is midway through the basketball game, you taking me out and you telling me you're not going back in. And I was told by a senator yesterday that it's only the employees that's hired after January 1st, 2014, right? But as a union representative, I look at our union as one union. That means that everybody that's employed now or that's retired or that is going to be a future employee, that we deserve the same opportunities that those that came before and will come after us to have gotten. And so I don't want to take that lightly, because those employees that may be here and have been here before me, longer than me, they didn't throw me under the bridge. They didn't say, well, just protect us, and then when David Ward gets hired, I don't care what you do to him. And I will not disrespect anybody who comes after me or after January 1st, 2014. So I want to put that on record today. So with that being said, please, senators on this board, please do not support House Bill 264.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Ward.
Greetings, Chair, Senator, Mr. Parker. It's a privilege here to stand before you today. I was listening.
Your name?
I'm Corinthia Albritton, Local 732 member. I've listened, have taken heed to both sides, and I understand both sides because we are in a financial crisis. And today, what kind of caught my attention out of it all, it was a patron who expressed her concern as a writer and the cuts that she has experienced throughout MARTA cutbacks. And the only thing I wanted to comment on was that I feel it was a yet left off of it. And what I mean by that is everyone is saying it only affects paratransit, but I don't feel that it has affected big bus yet or train yet. And that's all I really wanted to say. I feel that you guys are leaving the yet off of it through it all.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Does anyone else want to speak during the public comment period? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close off discussion. I do want to thank all the members of the public who did come and speak on the bill today. We don't usually get as lengthy an opportunity during the committee hearings as the bill moves through the legislative process, so I viewed this as an important opportunity for that. Mr. Parker, I'm probably going to hold one more hearing before the close of the legislative session. The issue I specifically want to address at that hearing is the Medicaid dumping issue. And as I've mentioned to you previously, I would like that issue quantified for us so that we can see its impact on MARTA. I view that as an issue that is one that could be the subject of legislation for the 2014 legislative session. And so I think it would be a good primer on that issue for members of this committee and members of the House and Senate to hear from MARTA about the issue before the close of the legislative session. All right. There being nothing further to come before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.